Have you ever stopped to think about the power hidden within your own name? It's more than just a sound people call you. It's a story, an identity, a piece of who you are. Now imagine a world where names don't just identify you. They define you, they shape reality, and in the wrong hands, they can unravel everything. This is the secret heart of Tolkien's universe. A truth so profound, it changes how we see power, identity, and destiny itself. Wherever you are right now, and whatever hour your clock shows, we'd love to know. What part of the world are you joining us from today? Let us know in the comments below. Every story becomes richer when shared. In the quiet, wisdom-lit halls of Rivendell, a young lore keeper named Alara stumbles upon a discovery that will alter the fate of Middle-earth. She finds an ancient scroll, brittle with age, whose words speak not of history or poetry, but of naming as the deepest magic of all. It tells her that a name is not a label, it is a key. It unlocks the essence of a thing, the truth of a being. To know something's true name is to understand it completely. To speak it with intent is to shape its destiny. But this power carries a shadow, for just as light reveals, darkness can distort, and there is one who seeks to twist this sacred power toward absolute control: Sauron. Alara realizes with growing dread that Sauron's rise is not built on armies alone. His true strategy is far more subtle and far more dangerous. He is stealing true names, the real names of places, beings, and things, and corrupting them, turning their innate power against themselves and the world. If he succeeds, the very fabric of Middle-earth will fray. Forests will forget how to grow, rivers will lose their song, and people will fade into silence, stripped of who they are. This is not a battle of swords. It is a war of words, of meaning, of memory. And so, with courage kindled by urgency, Alara embarks on a quest to find and protect the remaining pure names, to preserve what makes her world worth saving. Her journey reveals not just the hidden mechanics of Tolkien's legendarium, but a truth about our own world, that names matter, identity matters, and some powers are too profound to be left unchampioned. Alara did not hesitate. With the ancient scroll clutched tightly in her hand, she made her way to the one person in Rivendell who could possibly understand the depth of her discovery, Lord Elrond. In his quiet study, surrounded by artifacts of forgotten ages, she found him. The air hummed with the quiet power of preservation, of memory held sacred. She laid the scroll before him, her voice trembling not with fear, but with the sheer weight of what she had uncovered. Elrond listened, his ancient eyes seeing not just her, but the long centuries of history that had led to this moment. His expression grew grave as she spoke of Sauron's design to corrupt the very language of creation. He confirmed her deepest fears. You have stumbled upon a truth that many have forgotten, and that a few have sought to abuse. He began, his voice a low, resonant melody that seemed to calm the very air. A name, young lore keeper, is not a mere word. It is a living truth. It is the song of a thing's beginning, the echo of its purpose in the world. To know a true name is to hold a thread of reality itself in your hand. He explained that this is why the elves guard their true names so closely, sharing them only in utmost trust. To speak a name is to call upon its essence, to invite its nature into the world. But to twist a name, to force it into a shape it was never meant to hold, that is an act of profound violence. It does not merely deceive, it unravels. It creates a crack in the world through which shadow can pour, turning order into chaos and truth into a lie. Elrond's warning was stark. This unmaking is Sauron's ultimate goal. Armies can be defeated, fortresses can be besieged, but if the names of things are lost or corrupted, the world itself will simply forget how to be. The rivers would not know their own courses, the stones would forget their strength, and the hearts of living beings would lose their compass. But then his tone shifted from a general warning to a specific and terrifying immediacy. He leaned forward, the light catching the wisdom and the worry in his eyes. A dark agent moves already in the world, he revealed. A servant of the shadow, a whisperer of stolen syllables, and it seeks one name above all others, the true name of the last Ent, Baranuir. The very mention of the name seemed to change the quality of the silence in the room. Elrond explained that the Ents are not just shepherds of the trees, they are the living memory of the forests. Their names are intertwined with the roots and the rivers, with the cycle of seasons and the breath of the woodlands. To possess the true name of the last Ent would be to hold a key to the heart of every forest in Middle-earth. The Dark Agent would not just control Baranuir, it could speak a command of decay that would spread through the roots of every tree, a blight that would turn vast, ancient woodlands into silent, gray wastelands. The lungs of the world would fail. You must find him, Elrond urged, his voice infused with an urgency that brooked no argument. You must journey to the old forest and warn Baranuir before the agent finds him first. His name is his life, and his life is the life of the forest. If it is taken, all we hold dear will begin to wither from the inside out. The quest was no longer an academic pursuit. It was a race to save the very soul of the natural world. Guided by Elrond's urgent counsel, Alara left the serene refuge of Rivendell behind, stepping into the wilder, untamed lands that lay to the east. The air itself felt different outside the valley, sharper, less certain. She traveled light, her mind heavy with the responsibility of her mission, her senses alert for any sign of the Dark Agent hunting the last Ent. It was on the old forest road, a path barely more than a deer track, that she first heard the snap of a twig that was not made by any animal. She froze, her hand going to the hilt of her slender blade, only to find herself looking into the steady, wary eyes of a man clad in the worn leathers and greens of a ranger. He introduced himself simply as Aaron, a guardian of these lonely stretches, and he was immediately suspicious of an elf traveling alone and with such clear purpose. When Alara explained her quest, speaking of the power of names and the threat to the Ents, Aaron's expression shifted from suspicion to outright skepticism. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Name magic," he echoed, the words sounding almost foolish in the practical, gritty air of the wilderness. "I fight with a sword and rid the land by its tracks and weather. I've seen orc blades and poisoned streams. I've never seen a problem solved by whispering at a stone." To him, her lore was a scholar's fantasy, a delicate theory that would shatter against the harsh realities of Middle-earth. He saw the immediate, physical dangers the orc packs, the treacherous terrain, while her concern was for something invisible, intangible. Yet, despite his profound doubt, he recognized the sincerity in her eyes and the grave importance Rivendell had placed on her journey. His duty was to protect these lands, and if Lord Elrond had sent her, there was a threat he could not ignore, even if he couldn't comprehend its nature. Reluctantly, he offered to guide her, his knowledge of the hidden paths and safe passages proving invaluable from the very first hour. Their uneasy alliance was put to the test far sooner than either could have anticipated. As dusk began to settle, painting the rocky cliffs in long, deep shadows, Aaron led them through a narrow pass he promised would shave a day off their travel. But the shadows that moved were not just those cast by the setting sun. With guttural cries that shattered the evening's peace, a band of orcs erupted from hidden crevices, their crude scimitars glinting with malicious intent. They were trapped, the cliff face at their backs and the snarling pack closing in from the front. Aaron immediately drew his sword, placing himself between Alara and the onslaught, his every muscle coiled for a fight he knew was likely hopeless. This was the reality he understood: steel and blood, and a desperate last stand. But Alara did not draw a weapon. Instead, she closed her eyes, shutting out the chaos, the snarling, the certain death. She reached not for a blade, but for memory, for the deep, resonant truth buried within the ancient stone of the cliff behind them. She began to speak, her voice not a shout, but a low, steady hum that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. She spoke the true name of the stone, not as a command, but as a reminder, a calling forth of its oldest, most essential nature, to be solid, to be steadfast, to shelter and to endure. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Aaron braced for the first orc blade to strike. Then the cliff itself answered. With a deep, grinding groan that was more felt than heard, the rock face behind them seemed to shift and lean forward, great slabs of stone sliding down like a protective curtain, crashing into the earth between them and the orcs, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. The orcs' cries turned from bloodlust to confusion and fear as they found their path blocked by a sudden, impassable wall of living rock. In the stunned silence that followed, Aaron slowly lowered his sword, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He turned to look at Alara, then at the newly formed barrier, then back at her. The dismissive skepticism in his eyes was gone, utterly obliterated. It was replaced by a raw, awe-struck understanding. He had witnessed it. This was no scholar's fantasy. The power she wielded was not intangible. It was the most tangible force he had ever seen. It was the world itself answering to its true name. The air grew thick and heavy as they crossed the final ridge, the old forest sprawling before them like a sea of ancient, tangled green. It was not like the welcoming woods of LOTR or the orderly groves of Rivendell. This was a place of deep, primal memory, where the trees stood so close together, they seemed to be sharing secrets, and the very light that filtered through the canopy was tinged with an emerald gloom. From the moment they stepped beneath the first gnarled boughs, the silence was not a true silence at all. It was a low, constant murmur, a susurrus of leaves and creaking branches that formed words just on the edge of understanding. Aaron gripped the pommel of his sword, his ranger's senses screaming that they were being watched by 1,000 unseen eyes. The trees themselves were the sentinels here, and their message was not one of welcome. The whispers were warnings, a chorus of faint, frantic voices saying, "Turn back, danger sleeps here, the path is lost." Alara, however, did not hear the words with her ears alone. She felt them in the core of her being, a dissonance that made her shiver. She reached out, placing her palm against the rough, mossy bark of an ancient oak, and closed her eyes. She was not seeking a single name, but the true name of the forest itself. the grand harmonic song that bound every root, stream, and stone into a single living entity. But instead of a clear, resonant chord, she found only a fractured melody. It was like a beautiful tapestry, unraveling thread by thread. The name was fading, its power leaching away. "It's being stolen," she whispered, her voice full of a horrified awe. "Piece by piece, syllable by syllable, something is carving away at the forest's very identity, leaving only hollow echoes behind." The malevolent force Elrond had warned them of was already here, and its work was well underway. To restore the forest, to heal this wound, they would need to find its heart. The heart tree, the ancient center from which all other life in the wood drew its strength and its name. Trusting in her lore, Alara led the way, listening intently to the whispers, trying to discern a friendly voice among the fearful ones, a thread of truth in the tapestry of lies. She followed what she believed was a path of purer sound, a faint, clear note in the dissonant chorus. But the deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to turn against them. The whispers grew sharper, more insistent, now weaving themselves into a malicious deceit. "This way, child of elves," one voice would seem to beckon from the left, filled with false warmth. "Hurry, the heart tree bleeds," another would cry from the right, dripping with fabricated urgency. The very paths seemed to shift behind them, branches twisting to block their previous route, leaving them disoriented and walking in circles. Alara's confidence began to waver. Her great knowledge, her connection to the deep magic of names, was being used against her. The enemy knew a lore keeper would listen, and so it filled the air with nothing but lies for her to hear. Aaron, who had been following in wary silence, finally stopped. He placed a firm hand on her arm. "Alara, wait," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're listening to the forest. But you need to see it." He pointed to the ground at their feet. "There are no animal tracks here, none. Nothing drinks from this stream." He gestured to a patch of moss growing on a tree. "It grows in a pattern that only happens on the northern side, but the sun is there. The forest is lying to your ears, but it cannot change these facts." He was not listening to the whispers. He was reading the story written in the mud, the moss, and the light. His was a practical language of survival, and it was proving to be the one truth the corrupting influence could not fake. "The lore is in the land itself, not just the words on the air," he insisted. "Your way leads us deeper into the trap. We need to go this way." He pointed toward a seemingly impenetrable thicket, a path that made no sense to Alara's learned mind. It was a moment of profound choice, to trust the centuries of elven knowledge she had devoted her life to, or to trust the instincts of a mortal ranger who fought with a sword and read the world by its scars. She looked at his face, not skeptical now, but certain in his own understanding. He was not fighting her magic anymore. He was offering a different kind of magic altogether. With a slow, deliberate nod, she let go of the whispering voices and surrendered to his lead. He did not listen to the trees. He watched the flow of water along a route, felt the prevailing wind on his face, and found gaps in the undergrowth that spoke of older, truer paths. He was reading the true name of the forest, not in its sounds, but in its silent, physical truth. And step by step, the deceptive whispers began to fade behind them, replaced by a quieter, more genuine hum of life, as the forest itself began to guide the one who could truly see it. Following Aaron's lead through the deceptive whispers of the woods, they finally broke into a small, sun-drenched clearing that felt like the still, quiet center of a great storm. There, in the middle of the grove, stood the heart tree. It was not merely a tree, it was a living monument to time itself, its bark like carved stone, its branches a canopy that held the very sky aloft. And standing before it, as much a part of the tree as the roots at his feet, was the last Ent, Baranuir. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of continents shifting, and when he turned to face them, his eyes were deep pools of mossy green, holding a sadness as ancient as the mountains. I felt you walking my roots, his voice rumbled, not through the air, but through the ground beneath their feet, a sound like the deep notes of the earth itself. You walk with the light of Rivendell, and with the strength of the wild places, yet you also carry the shadow of the thing that seeks me. Alara bowed her head in reverence, but it was Aaron who spoke first, his ranger's bluntness tempered by newfound respect. We were sent to warn you. An agent of the enemy seeks your name. A sound like the groaning of a great forest in a winter gale emanated from Baranuir. It was a sigh of profound and weary grief. He already has it, little shooter, the Ent replied, the term not an insult, but an old, almost forgotten name for the race of men. Not all of it, not yet, but he has taken pieces. He carves his lies into my children, and with each cut, I forget. He explained that his name was not a word to be spoken and then forgotten. For an Ent, a name is a story. It is the memory of the first acorn that fell from the first oak at the dawn of the world. It is the echo of every summer rain that ever quenched the forest's thirst, the taste of every autumn that ever turned the leaves to fire. His name was his memory, and his memory was his life. To lose one was to lose the other. The shadow comes when the moon is veiled. Baranuir continued, his great head bowing as if under an immense weight. It is a thing of sharp edges and silent screams. It carries a blade that does not cut wood, but meaning. It etches false names, dark names, into the bark of the eldest oaks. With a hand that was more like a living branch, he gently gestured toward several of the ancient trees that formed a circle around the clearing. As Alara and Aaron looked closer, they saw them. Where the deep brown bark should have been smooth or textured by natural time, there were instead jagged, angular symbols carved deep into the wood. They were not any language Alara recognized from her studies in Rivendell. These marks were violent, hateful things. They seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light, and the air around those trees felt thin and cold. The trees themselves stood in a silent agony, their leaves trembling, though there was no wind. These false names are like poison in a stream, Baranuir lamented. They flow from the tree into the root, from the root into the earth, and from the earth into me. They sing a song of decay, of forgetting. They tell me that the forest is weak, that it wishes to sleep and never wake. They tell me my name is dust, and that my purpose is to be still. The horror of it washed over Alara. This was not a battle fought with armies. It was a slow, insidious murder of identity. The shadow Wraith wasn't just trying to control Baranuir. It was systematically convincing him that he was not Baranuir at all, that he was something lesser, something meant to fade away. With every passing night, the song of my own name grows fainter, the Ent said, his voice now little more than a whisper that shook the leaves above. I forget the shape of the stars I was named for. I forget the sound of the first river, If this continues, I will not be conquered. I will simply cease. And the forest will cease with me. He then turned his immense, sorrowful gaze fully upon them, a silent plea echoing in the deep green of his eyes. You have come. Will you help me cleanse this corruption? Will you help me remember who I am before I forget myself entirely? Alara did not hesitate. She stepped toward the nearest scarred oak, her heart aching at the sight of the jagged, pulsing marks that defiled its ancient bark. This was not a battle of strength, but of song. She closed her eyes, pushing aside her fear, and reached for the deep well of knowledge she had cultivated in Rivendel's libraries. She sought not for a spell of erasure, but for a memory of wholeness. In a voice that was both a whisper and a melody, she began to speak. She did not shout down the dark carvings, she sang over them. She spoke the true name of the oak, a name that was the sum of all the sunrises it had ever seen, all the rains that had ever nourished its roots, all the generations of birds that had sung from its branches. It was a name of growth, of resilience, of deep, abiding peace. As she spoke, the violent, angular marks on the tree began to soften. Their hard edges blurred, their sickly light flickered and dimmed. It was as if her voice was a gentle rain, washing away grime to reveal the true, beautiful grain of the wood beneath. The process was slow, meticulous, each syllable a careful stitch, mending a tear in reality itself. One by one, the false names surrendered to the truth, fading until nothing remained but clean, healthy bark. A palpable wave of relief seemed to emanate from the tree, a sigh that rustled its leaves and flowed into the earth. Alara moved to the next tree, and then the next, her voice growing steadily weaker with each effort. The act of speaking a true name was not merely recitation. It was an act of profound empathy, of pouring her own spirit into the words to make them live again. By the fifth tree, she was trembling, her face pale, leaning against Aaron for support as she forced the final, healing syllables past her lips. The clearing was cleansed, the immediate poison drawn out. Baranuir let out a long, deep breath that sounded like the wind moving through a vast, healthy forest. The oppressive cold lifted, and the natural sounds of life, the chirp of insects, the call of a distant bird tentatively returned. You have given my children back their voices, the Ent rumbled, his own tone infused with a strength that had been absent moments before. You have reminded them of their song. For this, you have the gratitude of the forest and all that dwells within it. But the ancient being's gratitude was swiftly overshadowed by a grave and urgent warning. His immense, mossy eyes fixed on the exhausted Alara. The effort has cost you dearly, child, for you wage war against a shadow that has endless reserves of spite. Know this, the creature you faced, the wraith that carves these lies, is but a finger of a far greater hand. It is a servant, a hollow thing sent to do the bidding of a power that seeks not to conquer, but to unmake. The words hung in the cleansed air, more chilling than any description of armies or dark lords. This greater power understands that to control a thing is temporary, but to unname it is eternal, Baranuir explained. It begins with the oldest among us, for our names are the pillars that hold up the sky of history, the Ents, the eagles, the great spirits of river and mountain. If our names are forgotten, or worse, replaced with lies, then the story of this world becomes thin, a parchment scraped clean and rewritten with a single dark narrative. The rivers will not know their own courses, the mountains will forget their foundations, and the hearts of all living things will lose the map of their own souls. This was Sauron's ultimate design, refined from his desire for dominion into a pure, terrifying nihilism. He would not be a king ruling over a living world. He would be a silent god in a void of his own creation, having first convinced the world that it had never existed at all. A profound silence settled over the clearing, broken only by the gentle, grateful rustle of the leaves above. Baranuir observed the pale, weary form of the young lore keeper, her strength spent in the act of healing his domain. Her courage had proven brighter than the shadow that sought to dim it. With a slow, deliberate movement that whispered like wind through a canopy, the great ant raised one of his immense, branch-like hands. From a twig near his heart, a single leaf, larger than Alara's hand and shimmering with a soft, internal luminescence, detached itself. It drifted down not as a leaf falls in autumn, but with purpose, landing gently in her open palms. It was warm to the touch, and its surface was not merely veined. It was inscribed with intricate, flowing patterns that seemed to shift and dance just at the edge of sight. These were not carved marks, but something born of the leaf itself, a living script. "This is Yavalinya," Baranuir intoned, his voice resonating with the gravity of the gift. The true name of light, as it was first conceived by the stars. It is not a sword to be swung, but a truth to be spoken. Shadow is not a thing of substance. It is an absence, a forgetting of light. Speak this name with clarity and intent, and you do not attack the darkness. You remind the world of what was always there. You fill the absence with memory. He warned her that this power was pure and would be resisted fiercely by the unnatural void they faced. It would be a beacon in the gloom, and the gloom would seek to extinguish it. This was not a weapon of conquest, but of preservation, a shield woven from the oldest song of creation. The ant's immense gaze then turned westward, as if he could see across the leagues to the sundering sea. But a single truth, however powerful, cannot rewrite a story that is being unwritten. The shadow that attacks us learns, it adapts. To truly counter it, you must go to the source of all naming. You must journey to the Grey Havens. The very name of the place seemed to hang in the air, charged with myth and mystery. Baranuir explained that the Grey Havens were not merely a port where ships departed. They were a living library of Genesis, the place where the first elves had awakened, and the first true names had been breathed into the silence of the world. The earliest lore keepers, beings of immense wisdom and power, had woven the very fabric of reality with their songs of naming, establishing the natural order that Sauron now sought to dismantle. Their understanding is not written in scrolls like the one you found, the ant continued. It is sung into the stones of the harbor, whispered on the sea winds, held in the memory of the tides. They are the guardians of the original language, the unbroken thread that connects the present to the moment of beginning. His warning was dire and immediate. The enemy understood this too. The same agent that sought to unname the forest would inevitably turn its attention to that wellspring of power. If it reached the Grey Havens first, it would not just learn the names, it would poison the source. It would twist the first songs into discordant echoes of control, forever corrupting the foundation of all things. The journey was therefore a race, not just for knowledge, but for the sanctity of existence itself. Find the ancient namers, Baranuir urged, his voice beginning to fade into the gentle sounds of the rejuvenated forest, as if his strength was returning just as Alara's had waned. Learn from them not how to fight the darkness, but how to remember the light so fiercely that the darkness holds no power. Go, before the enemy learns to make the world forget itself forever. Leaving the sanctuary of the old forest felt like stepping out of a living memory and back into a world under siege. The air, once filled with the gentle hum of Baranuir's restored song, grew thin and cold again just a few miles from the tree line. They moved with urgency, the Ents warning about the gray havens, a constant drumbeat in their minds. But the enemy had not been idle. It had been waiting. The first sign was a sound that was not a sound, a pressure in the air, a vibration that felt like silence screaming. Then came the whispers. They did not come from the trees or the rocks, but from everywhere and nowhere at once, a chilling chorus of stolen voices layered over a core of pure malice. It was the shadow Wraith, and it had found their trail. Its voice was a weapon designed to unravel thought itself. It did not shout threats or promises. It simply spoke the stolen names of things around them, twisting their essence and sowing utter confusion. One moment, the path before them was clear, the name of the stone beneath their feet, a solid, reassuring truth. Then the Wraith would whisper a corrupted, jagged version of that same name, and the solid ground would seem to liquefy, the rocks shifting like sand, causing them to stumble. It whispered the false name of the wind, turning a gentle breeze into a sudden, biting gale that tore at their cloaks and filled their eyes with dust. It spoke a warped name for the sun, making the clear daylight seem to flicker and dim, casting long, grasping shadows where none should be. The very world became untrustworthy, a shifting nightmare where reality itself was a lie spoken by a faceless foe. Alara clutched the glowing leaf, Yevelinia, but the Wraith stayed just out of sight, its voice its only assault, making a direct counter impossible. Aaron, his jaw set against the disorienting cacophony, fought not with lore, but with sheer force of will. He focused on the tangible, the feel of his sword's hilt in his hand, the weight of his pack on his shoulders, the next physical step forward. But the assault was not just on the world around them, it was on their minds. The Wraith's voice slithered into their thoughts, echoing with the names of their own fears. For Alara, it was the name of failure, of loss, of Rivendell falling into silence. For Aaron, it was older, darker things, the names of past regrets, of friends lost, of his own perceived inadequacies. He stumbled, not from a shifting path, but from the weight of the memories the Wraith's whispers invoked. The creature was trying to unname them from the inside out, to convince them that they were not heroes on a quest, but merely lost, frightened souls defined only by their sorrows. In that moment of shared despair, as Alara struggled to find a true name to cleanse the air itself, Aaron did something utterly unexpected. He stopped walking. He planted his feet firmly on the treacherous ground, took a deep breath that was a fight in itself, and he shouted into the swirling, whispering chaos. But he did not shout a challenge or a curse. He shouted a riddle, what is given by a mother and father, shaped by choice, and owned by no one but the one who lives it. It is a story only I can tell, and a truth even this shadow cannot break. His voice, rough and mortal and defiant, cut through the spectral whispers like a clarion call. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The disorienting whispers ceased. The shifting landscape stilled, as if the very darkness was listening, perplexed by this strange, illogical defiance. The Shadow Wraith, a creature that operated on the theft and corruption of existing names, was confronted with something it could not comprehend. A name that was not a fixed thing to be stolen, but a living, evolving question. Aaron's riddle was the essence of his own identity, his true name not as a static word, but as a narrative of his own making. The Wraith, drawn by the potency of this self-defined power, began to coalesce before them, its form a shifting vortex of gloom and stolen syllables, focusing its entire attention on the Ranger. It was trying to solve the riddle, to parse the name within it, to claim it and add it to its collection. In its obsessive need to possess every name, it had to stop and analyze this new puzzle, and in doing so, its general assault on the environment halted completely. It was temporarily bound not by magic, but by its own corrosive nature. For a few precious, silent seconds, the world snapped back into focus. The path was just a path. The wind was just the wind. Alara looked at Aaron, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. His gamble, born of sheer desperation and a ranger's cunning, had worked. He had proven that power was not the sole dominion of ancient elves and their profound lore. The act of defining oneself, of asserting one's own identity in the face of a force that sought to erase it, held a magic all its own. A mortal's courage, his choice to stand and declare who he was rather than be defined by what he feared, had created a shield that the shadow, for all its stolen power, could not immediately penetrate. It was a fleeting victory, but a monumental one. It proved that darkness could be held at bay, not just by the remembered light of the stars, but by the kindled spark of a single, brave human soul. The whispering pursuit of the Shadow Wraith faded behind them as the landscape shifted once more, giving way to the solemn, salt-tinged air of a forgotten coast. Before them, nestled against the edge of the sea, like a half-sunken crown, lay the ruins they had risked so much to find, the lost library of Númenórian. It was not a building in any traditional sense, but a series of vast, open-air courtyards and archways carved from pale, sea-washed stone, their surfaces etched with scripts, so ancient even Alara's elven eyes struggled to parse them. This was not a place of books and scrolls, but of stone and memory. The great seafaring kings of Númenórian had not stored their knowledge on perishable parchment. They had inscribed it directly into the foundations of the world, believing their wisdom would endure as long as the stone itself. Their arrogance had been their downfall, but their library remained, a ghost of immense knowledge, waiting for those who knew how to listen. Alara moved through the grand, crumbling archways with a reverence usually reserved for sacred groves, her fingers gently tracing the intricate carvings. The maps we seek won't be drawn on paper, she explained to Aaron, her voice hushed by the weight of ages. The path to the Grey Havens was considered the most sacred of journeys. The Númenórians believed such a route could not be simply seen, it had to be understood. It was a test of worthiness. The directions are hidden within name riddles, puzzles where the answer is not a place, but a concept, and the concept reveals the path. She stopped before a massive, circular dais, set into the center of the main courtyard. Radiating out from its center were lines of text in a complex, interlocking script, surrounding a series of stone dials and shifting plates that looked less like a map and more like an astrolabe fused with a poet's lexicon. The first riddle was carved around the dais' outer rim. The script flowed like water, and as Alara read it aloud, the words seemed to resonate in the still air. I have no voice, but I sing the first song. I have no light, but I show the first path. I am the container of all true names. What am I? Aaron stood guard, his eyes scanning the empty arches for any sign of movement, his hand never leaving his sword. He watched as Alara's brow furrowed in concentration, her lips moving silently as she tested possibilities. It is not the sea, she murmured, dismissing her first thought. The sea has a voice. It is not a star, for a star has light. Then her eyes widened, and she looked up at the vast, empty sky above them. It is silence, she breathed. The silence that was before the first word was spoken, the blank page upon which the song of creation was written. As she spoke the answer, the central dial of the dais gave a soft, grinding click and rotated a precise degree, aligning a new set of symbols. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer passed through the air around them, a ripple of released energy. Alara felt a corresponding shift within her own understanding, as if a dusty corner of her mind had been suddenly illuminated. The foundational concept of naming, that it must exist within a void to have meaning, clicked into place with a new, profound clarity. But Aaron stiffened, his head snapping toward the library's entrance. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. From the direction of the forest they had left behind came a distant, answering shiver, a cold, hungry echo that had not been there a moment before. Solving the riddle had not been a silent act of intellect. It had been a ringing of a metaphysical bell, and something had heard it. Undeterred, Alara moved to the next panel. The stakes were now terrifyingly clear. Each step toward their goal was also a step toward alerting their hunter. The second riddle was shorter, more cryptic. I am seen only when I am broken. I am held but never kept. I am given but never taken. What am I? This one took longer. Aaron suggested a promise, but the stone did not respond. Alara considered law and oath, but the dial remained still. Frustration began to creep in, the pressure of the approaching Wraith, making every second feel like a lifetime. Then, looking at her own hands, at the way they held the light of the glowing leaf Baranuir had given her, she understood. "It is a ray of light," she said. "A single ray is broken from the whole sunbeam. You can hold it in your hand for a moment, but you cannot keep it. It is given by the sun, but you cannot take it from the sky." Another soft click, another rotation of the dial, another wave of understanding washed over her, this time about the nature of light as a gift, not a possession, a truth directly tied to the power of the name she carried. This time, the answering call from the Wraith was not distant. It was a sharp, psychic crackle that made the fine hairs on their arms stand on end. The air grew colder, and the long shadows cast by the pillars seemed to deepen and stretch. They were running out of time. The final riddle was the simplest and the most daunting. A single word was carved in the center of the dais: remember. Below it was not a question, but a command. Speak the name of this place not as it is, but as it was. Alara knew the name of the library ruins. It was a word from a dead language meaning the sundered halls. But to speak it as it was would do nothing. She had to reach back through time to the moment of its founding and speak the name its builders had given it with hope and pride before the shadow of arrogance fell. She closed her eyes, pushing past the fear, past the creeping cold, reaching for the deepest layers of her memory, for the oldest songs the elves still sang of Númenórian in its glory. She found it, a name not of loss but of purpose, a name that meant the harbor of the Starwise. She drew a breath and spoke it into the chilling air. The word was complex, musical, full of the hope of sailors setting out to chart the heavens themselves. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the entire dais began to glow with a soft, blue-white luminescence. The rotating dials spun rapidly before locking into a final, perfect alignment. The carved lines radiating from the center now shone like pathways of starlight, converging on a single, clear route that led west toward the sea. They had their map, but the cost was immediate and severe. The moment the true name of the place was spoken, a shriek of pure, undiluted rage tore through the ruins, no longer a whisper, but a physical force that shook dust from the ancient arches. The shadow wraith had not just been alerted, it had been given a beacon. It now knew exactly where they were, and the profound power Alara had just invoked was a siren's call to its corrosive hunger. The race was no longer just toward the Grey Havens. It was a desperate sprint against a darkness that now knew the precise value of its prey. While Alara stood transfixed by the glowing map of starlight, her mind racing through the implications of the route now laid bare before them, Erin's more practical instincts took over. The wraith's shriek of rage was still echoing off the ancient stone, a promise of imminent violence that demanded action. While Alara deciphered the cosmic directions, Erin's eyes scanned their immediate surroundings, searching for anything that could serve as shelter, a weapon, or an escape. His gaze fell upon a section of wall that seemed wrong, where every other surface was adorned with intricate, flowing script. One large, rectangular slab was utterly blank, its edges too sharp and precise to be a product of the sea's erosion or time's gentle decay. It was a door, and it had been meant to be hidden. He ran his fingers along its seamless edge, finding no latch, no handle, no keyhole. "Alara," he called, his voice tight with urgency. "This doesn't belong." She broke her focus from the celestial map and joined him, her scholar's eyes immediately recognizing the anomaly. This was not Númenórian design. It was something older, something deliberately sealed away. Remembering the library's own true name, the Harbor of the Starwise, she placed her palm flat against the center of the blank stone and spoke it again, not as a key, but as a sign of respect, an acknowledgement of shared purpose. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, grating sigh that had not been heard for an age, the massive slab slid inward and sideways, revealing a darkness so absolute it seemed to swallow the very light from the courtyard behind them. The air that poured out was not stale, but incredibly still and cold, carrying a scent of dry stone and something else, the electric tang of a sky after a lightning strike. Lighting a torch, Erin stepped inside first, his sword held ready. The chamber was small and circular, its walls, floor, and ceiling covered not in carvings, but inlaid with a breathtaking mosaic, made of what could only be fragments of stars themselves, pieces of obsidian, mother of pearl, and polished crystal that gleamed in the torchlight. And at its center, on a simple pedestal of white marble, rested a single object, a star chart. But it was unlike any navigational tool either of them had ever seen. It was a sculpture of delicate, woven wires of mithril and copper, holding captured spheres of glass that contained swirling, miniature galaxies, It was a map of the heavens, but it was alive. The tiny stars within the glass spheres pulsed with a soft, internal light, and they moved, tracing slow, eternal arcs across their crystalline prisons. Alara approached it with a reverence that bordered on terror, understanding that this was not a map to be read with the eyes, but with the soul. There were no labels, no notations of leagues or distances. As she reached out, her fingers hesitating just above the cool metal, the central sphere, a perfect orb of clearest glass, holding a single, brilliantly blue star, drifted toward her touch. The moment her skin made contact, knowledge flooded into her not as words, but as pure understanding. The room, the chart, the very air seemed to dissolve around her, and she was everywhere and nowhere at once, seeing the truth of the Grey Havens. They were not a port city on some distant shore, waiting to be found by a ship sailing west. The Grey Havens were a confluence, a moment of perfect harmony between the singer and the song, the namer and the name. It was a state of being accessible only when three things aligned. A seeker who understood the true nature of names, not as control but as communion. A true name of immense power, spoken with perfect intent, and a specific, celestial alignment. A doorway in time itself, written in the movements of the stars overhead. The chart was not showing a path across the sea. It was a calendar, an astronomical clock, counting down to the next time the gateway between the world of substance and the realm of pure meaning would be thin enough to part. The autumn equinox was not just a date. It was the moment when day and night were in perfect balance, a reflection of the balance needed within one's own spirit to approach such a place. She withdrew her hand as if burned, the vision vanishing and leaving her gasping in the small, dark chamber. The staggering truth of it settled upon her with the weight of the ocean. Their journey was infinitely more complex and perilous than they had ever imagined. They were not simply racing an enemy to a location. They were racing to a moment. Failure did not mean taking a wrong turn or arriving too late to find a city. Failure meant standing on the correct stretch of shore, under the correct stars, speaking the correct name with a heart that was even slightly out of balance, and achieving nothing. The gateway would not open, and if they missed this equinox, they would have to wait another full turn of the seasons, a year in which Sauron's shadow would continue its work of unnaming the world, growing stronger as they grew more desperate. But there was a worse fate. The vision had shown her that to speak the true name at the wrong time, or with a heart bent on dominion rather than understanding, would not merely fail to open the gateway. It could shatter the seeker's mind, trapping them in a void between worlds, a ghost forever yearning for a shore they could perceive but never reach. The stakes were no longer about winning a race. They were about achieving a state of grace under the most immense pressure imaginable, with eternity itself hanging in the balance. The cold shriek that had echoed through the Númenórian ruins was not an echo at all. It was a herald. The shadow wraith descended upon their hidden chamber, not as a mist or a phantom, but as a solid wave of negation, a roaring silence that tore at the edges of reality itself. The beautiful star chart's gentle light was the first thing to die, its swirling galaxies snuffed out as if they had never been, plunging the small room into an oppressive gloom that felt heavier than any darkness. Alara acted on instinct born of desperation, her voice cutting through the void as she raised the leaf inscribed with Ivalinia, the true name of light. She did not shout it as a command, but sang it as a truth, a reminder to the world of what it had forgotten. A sphere of soft, golden radiance bloomed around her, pushing back against the encroaching shadow. It was not a brilliant, blinding sun, but a steadfast, dawn-like glow that held the line. The Wraith recoiled from it, its form, a shifting, man-shaped hole in the world, hissing with a sound like steam on ice. For a moment, it seemed to work. The assault was halted, but the creature was a master of names, and it understood that the most potent attack is never against the shield, but against the arm that holds it. Its featureless head turned from Alara, the source of the annoying light, and fixed instead upon Aaron, who stood beside her with his sword held high, a mortal man trying to defend against a storm with a single branch. The Wraith's voice did not return as a scream, but as the intimate, venomous whisper that bypassed Aaron's ears entirely to coil directly around his mind. It did not speak threats or lies about the present. It went much, much deeper. It found the bedrock of his identity, his true name, not the word he was called, but the sum of all his experiences, his regrets, his shames, his hidden fears, and it began to whisper it back to him. It showed him not a distorted version of himself, but a painfully accurate one. He saw a flash of a younger self, letting go of a friend's hand during a flash flood in the Eden Moors, the moment of pure, selfish panic that had haunted him for years. The Wraith named that moment not as a mistake, but as his core truth. It whispered the name Coward. Another wave of its psychic assault brought the scent of damp earth and the sound of a death rattle, the final breath of his first mentor, an old ranger who had died because Aaron had chosen to follow a false trail, a decision made in overconfidence. The Wraith named that failure arrogance. It wove these moments together, these true and painful memories, into a new, horrific tapestry of his identity. It used the undeniable truth of his past to sell the lie of his present nature. The whisper became a roaring verdict in his mind. You are not a protector. You are a failure. Your courage is a performance. Your loyalty is a chain you drag because you have nothing else. You are, and always will be, defined by these moments of weakness. The physical world faded away. The chamber, Alara's desperate song of light, the imminent danger, all of it was drowned out by the crushing weight of this internal indictment. Aaron's sword arm grew heavy, then fell limp to his side. His knees buckled, not from an external force, but from the immense gravity of the shame he was being made to feel. He was drowning in the unarguable evidence of his own imperfections. Alara saw him falter, saw the light of defiance in his eyes gutter and dim, but she was locked in her own struggle, pouring every ounce of her spirit into maintaining the name of light, her own strength rapidly depleting. She could not fight his battle for him. This was a war that had to be won within the private fortress of his own soul. On his knees, with the Wraith's corrosive whisper etching its verdict into his heart, Aaron faced a choice more fundamental than any he had ever made on a battlefield. He could accept the name the Wraith was giving him. It was, after all, built from real stones of his past. The path of least resistance was to surrender to that story, to become the sum of his worst moments and simply cease. Or he could do something far more difficult. He could reclaim his name. Gasping against the psychic pressure, he looked inward, not at the memories the Wraith was highlighting, but at the spaces between them. He saw the years of steadfast guardianship that came after the flood, the countless lives he had protected on the wild roads. He He remembered the weight of his mentor's sword on his belt, not as a burden of guilt, but as an inheritance of purpose, a vow to learn from that fatal error and become wiser, not to be paralyzed by it. The Wraith whispered coward. Aaron remembered choosing to stand between Alara and the Orcs when he thought it was hopeless. It whispered failure. He remembered leading her true when her own lore had led her astray in the old forest. It defined him by his past regrets. He defined himself by his present choices. With a shuddering, ragged breath that was his first act of defiance, he stopped listening to the Wraith's curated history and began to speak his own. He didn't shout. His voice was a low, raw scrape of sound, but it was entirely his own. "I am the one who got back up," he whispered to the darkness. "I am the one who learned. I am the friend who remembers and the guardian who continues." He did not deny his past. He simply refused to let it be the whole story. He was reclaiming the narrative of his own life, asserting that his true name was not a fixed, damning sentence, but a living, evolving story that he was still writing. And in that act of courageous self-definition, the Wraith's power over him shattered. The whispers cut off as if a door had been slammed, and Aaron surged to his feet, his eyes clear, his own name, his whole, complex, flawed, and courageous name, firmly back in his own keeping. The oppressive silence that had filled the hidden chamber lifted, leaving behind only the scent of cold stone and the electric charge of a battle, won not with steel, but with spirit. Aaron stood tall, his breathing steady, the ghost of the shadow Wraith's venomous whispers completely banished from his eyes. He looked at Alara, who still held the leaf of Evelinia aloft, its soft light now a comforting glow rather than a desperate shield. In that shared, quiet moment, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer a skeptical ranger and a determined lore keeper. They were two pillars, each having proven their strength in a way the other now understood completely. A slow, genuine smile touched Aaron's lips, the first true smile Alara had seen from him since their meeting on the forest road. "I owe you an apology," he began, his voice rough but clear. "I thought your magic was about words on a page. I was wrong." He gestured vaguely around the room, at the now dark star chart, at the memory of the Wraith's assault. What I felt, it wasn't hearing a word. It was being shown a mirror of my own soul, and then being told the reflection was all I would ever be. It tried to name me, to define me by my worst moments. He met her gaze, his expression one of hard-won understanding. But a name, a true name, it isn't just a sound people call you. It's not a label you're born with. It's a story you choose to live. It's the sum of your choices, especially the ones you make when everything is trying to tell you to give up. It is courage, given a voice. This admission, coming from the pragmatic ranger who had once laughed at the idea of name magic, was more powerful than any ancient scroll. It bridged the gap between his world of tangible danger and her world of intangible truth. They were both guardians, just of different realms. His victory had proven that the power of identity was not an elvish secret, but a universal strength. It was a force that could be wielded by anyone with the courage to define themselves. This newfound unity of purpose clarified their path forward with stunning simplicity. The celestial gateway to the Grey Havens was not a physical place to be marched toward. It was a convergence in the sky, a moment in time high above the world. No horse or ship could take them there. They needed guides who were born of the air itself, beings whose very essence was woven into the fabric of the heavens they needed to reach. The eagles, Alara said, the answer feeling inevitable. Aaron nodded, his ranger's knowledge immediately providing context. The great eagles of the misty mountains. They are the lords of the high air, the scouts of man, Wa himself. Their eyries are places no man or elf can climb to, but then his practical mind posed the next question. But how do we call them? You cannot send a message by raven to a creature of the wind. Alara's thoughts turned to the lore, to the oldest tales of the elder days. We do not call them with a message, she explained, her voice filled with a reverent certainty. We call them with a truth. Their true names are not words to be spoken like yours or mine. They are songs. They are the melody of the wind through the high passes, the harmony of a storm breaking against a peak, the counterpoint of a single feather cutting through a silent sky. To speak to an eagle, one did not ask for aid. One acknowledged their nature. One had to sing a piece of the sky back to them to prove they understood the domain the eagles ruled. It was an act of recognition, not of summons. It was the most perilous and delicate naming she would yet attempt, for the eagles were proud and ancient, and would not respond to a summons from anyone, no matter how urgent their cause. They would only answer a respectful reminder of who they were, sung into the air from a heart that understood the difference between asking for help and offering respect. Their journey now turned upward, toward the peaks, where the air was thin and the songs of the sky were waiting to be heard. The ascent into the misty mountains was a trial that tested the very limits of their bodies and spirits. The air grew thin and sharp, each breath a conscious effort that offered little sustenance. The paths were treacherous, often little more than crumbling ledges over bottomless drops, where a single misstep meant a fall into echoing silence. Aaron's ranger skills were their only guide through the labyrinth of stone and scree, his instincts for finding purchase and safe passage proving as vital as any map. For days they climbed, leaving the green world far below, entering a realm of rock, wind, and sky that felt both primal and profoundly lonely. The shadow wraith's whispers seemed unable to follow them here, its corrosive presence replaced by a vast, imposing emptiness that was almost more intimidating in its sheer, indifferent scale. They were utterly exposed, two small figures against the face of an ancient, unforgiving world. They reached the appointed place not by a map, but by following the instructions etched into Alara's memory from the Númenórian star chart, a high, wind-scoured plateau where the stone was worn smooth by countless ages of storms, and the sky felt close enough to touch. This was a place of meeting, a neutral ground between the earth and the heavens. Alara knew that to call such a being required more than a shout into the void. It required an offering of truth, a respectful acknowledgement of his nature. She closed her eyes, not against the biting wind, but to better feel its essence, to listen to the story it told as it rushed over the granite peaks. She sought not a word, but a song, the unique, powerful melody that was the true name of the Lord of the Eagles. When she opened her eyes, she did not look up into the sky, but down at her own hands, at the leaf of Ivalinia, which pulsed with a soft, steady light. She began to speak, but her voice was not her own. It was lower, resonant, weaving itself into the very fabric of the mountain wind. She spoke of the pride of the high places, of the first dawn light striking the highest peak, She sang of the patience of the updraft, of the fierce joy of the stoop, of the unparalleled perspective that sees the whole world as a tapestry of interconnected stories. She did not speak his common name, Gwaihir. She wove a tapestry of sound that was his essence, his history, his sovereign domain-given voice. It was an act of profound reverence, a naming that was not a summons, but a recognition of his rightful kingship of the air. For a long moment, there was only the wind. Then, a shadow fell over them, not the cold void of the Wraith, but a vast, living darkness that blotted out the sun. With a sound like the snapping of 1,000 great sails, Gwaihir, the Windlord, descended. His wingspan was so immense, it seemed to change the weather of the plateau, and his eyes held the ancient, golden light of a sun that had seen the world shaped. He landed before them, not with a crash, but with a graceful, earth-shaking finality, folding his wings and regarding them with a gaze that felt like it could see through stone and into the very core of their intentions. There was no anger in his look, only a deep, timeless curiosity. That is a song that has not been sung in these heights for many an age. His voice rumbled, not in the air, but in their bones, a sound like continents shifting far below. You remember the old truths, child of elves. You speak not to command, but to honor. That is a language my kind still understands. Speak now your need. Alara, humbled by his immense presence, explained their quest with a clarity forged by desperation and purpose. She spoke of the shadow that sought to unname the world, of the corrupted agent hunting them, and of their need to reach the celestial gateway to the Grey Havens before the enemy could poison its source. She did not beg. She stated their cause as a matter of fact, an alignment of purpose between the guardians of the earth and the lords of the sky against a common, existential foe. Gwaihir listened, his great head tilted, his piercing eyes missing no nuance of her story or the steadfast presence of the ranger beside her. His decision was swift. The enemy you describe is a blight upon all that is, upon the song of Arda itself, he intoned. His silence must not be allowed to drown out the music of creation. I will bear you, but hold tightly, for the path we take is not meant for those who live their lives upon the ground. With a grace that defied his colossal size, he allowed them to clamber onto his broad back, finding holds within the dense, weather-proofed feathers of his shoulders. Then, with a single, powerful thrust of his legs, he launched them into the abyss of the sky. The world fell away with a breathtaking suddenness that stole the air from their lungs. He did not simply fly. He rode the very currents of the world, climbing higher and higher with each great beat of his wings, until the mighty peaks of the misty mountains looked like mere wrinkles on a vast stone tapestry far below. They broke through the layer of clouds into a realm of blinding, eternal sun, where the air was so thin it felt like crystal, and the blue of the sky deepened into the endless black of space. Here, in this rarefied realm, a strange thing happened. The world they knew seemed to slow down, its rhythms fading into a distant hum. The sun did not appear to move across the sky, but hung in a perpetual, golden hour. The wind, which had been a roaring force during their ascent, became a constant, silent river upon which Gwaihir glided with effortless majesty. It was as if they had flown not just upward, but slightly outside of time itself, into a corridor where the rules of the earth below held little sway. The experience was both exhilarating and deeply unnerving, a reminder that they were in the domain of powers far older and greater than themselves. It was in this timeless place that Gwaihir spoke again, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the overwhelming immensity. The gateway you seek does not reside on any shore you can walk to, he explained, his words carrying the weight of celestial knowledge. It is a seam in the world, a moment of perfect alignment between the song of the spheres and the intent of the heart. It opens not at a place, but at a time. He turned his great head, one golden eye fixing upon them. The door will part only at the first touch of the dawn sun on the day of the autumn equinox, when the balance between light and dark is absolute in the world below. It is a balance that must be reflected within the seeker, a harmony of purpose, with no desire for dominion tipping the scales. To arrive with a heart-seeking power is to find only a closed door, or worse, a void that will unmake you. You have until that dawn to prepare not your journey, but your spirits. The timeless realm of the high air could not shield them from the relentless march of the calendar below. With Gwaihir's warning echoing in their minds, the descent back to the world of substance felt like a plunge into a rushing river of seconds and minutes, each one flowing relentlessly toward the autumn equinox. The lush green of the lower valleys was already beginning to blush with the first hints of gold and crimson, a beautiful yet terrifying sight. Every changing leaf was a ticking clock, a silent countdown to a dawn that would offer either salvation or utter ruin. They traveled now with a frantic urgency, their previous challenges feeling like mere preliminaries to this final, desperate sprint. The enemy was no longer a distant threat. It was a rival in a race, its shadowy presence felt in every unnaturally silent grove and every patch of land where the names of things seemed thin and faded. They knew, with a chilling certainty, that the shadow Wraith and its master were also moving, not toward a place, but toward that same celestial moment in time, intent on perverting the gateway's purpose with their collection of stolen and broken names. This grim understanding settled over Alara like a physical weight as they made camp one evening in the foothills, the brilliant tapestry of the autumn stars stretching endlessly above them. She watched Aaron, now Arinal, a name he wore with a new, quiet solemnity, tending to the fire, his movements efficient and sure. He had found a core of strength within himself, a name he had chosen and reclaimed. And that thought struck her with the force of a physical blow, leaving her breathless. He knew who he was. In the heart of the storm, when the Wraith had tried to unmake him, he had fought back with the truth of his own story. But what was her story? She was a lore keeper of Rivendell. She was the bearer of a leaf inscribed with the name of light. She was a student of names. But who was she at her very essence? The question unfolded in her mind, a terrifying and profound revelation. Her entire quest had been about protecting the names of others, the Ent, the forest, the river, the world itself. She had wielded true names like tools and shields, speaking them with reverence and skill, but she had never once turned that understanding inward. Her own true name was a mystery to her, a sealed scroll in the library of her own soul. In the quiet of the elven realms, true names were often discovered through deep meditation and ritual, a journey of self-discovery undertaken over centuries. She was young by the measure of her people, and that journey lay ahead of her in a future that might now never come. The sheer, terrifying implication of this dawned on her as she stared into the flames. The gateway to the Grey Havens required a true name of immense power, spoken with perfect intent and a heart in perfect balance. The enemy planned to batter it open with a cacophony of stolen names, a forced entry that would likely shatter the door and poison the source. But what if the key was not a weapon, but an offering? What if the gateway did not require the name of a mountain or a star, but the true name of the one who sought to enter? The purity of the seeker's own identity, spoken aloud at that moment of perfect balance, could be the very resonance that harmonized with the gateway's own ancient song, persuading it to open. Conversely, if her name was unknown to her, if her own heart was out of balance with doubt or fear, her plea would fall on deaf ears. And worse, a far more chilling thought, if the enemy somehow discovered her true name before she did, they would possess the ultimate key. They wouldn't need to force the gate. They could simply speak her essence with malicious intent, using her own identity as a lever to pry open the way for themselves. Her quest was no longer just about protecting the names of the world. It was a race to discover the most important name of all, her own, before her enemies could discover it for her. The high cliff was not a place of stone and sea so much as a seam in the world itself, a precipice where the solidity of Middle Earth seemed to thin into a luminous, trembling veil. They stood upon its edge as the first faint silver of dawn began to bleed into the darkness over the eastern sea, the air humming with a tension that was both terrifying and beautiful. This was the moment Gwaihir had described the autumn equinox, the instant of perfect balance where day and night held their breath, and the boundary between the physical and the profound became permeable. Alara could feel it in her very soul, a harmonic resonance, waiting for the right note to be sung. Arinal stood beside her, his hand resting on his sword, his face a mask of grim readiness. They were not just waiting for a door to open, they were waiting to sing the world into allowing them passage. But they were not alone in their vigil. As the first sliver of the sun's rim broke the horizon, painting the sea in fire, a different kind of darkness coalesced opposite them. It did not flow from the shadows of the rocks, but seemed to tear itself from the fabric of the air, a wound of pure negation. The shadow Wraith materialized first, its form more solid and menacing than ever before, a vortex of stolen syllables and anguished whispers given a semblance of shape. And beside it stepped its master. He was not a towering figure of armor and flame, but a man, or what had once been a man. His robes were fine but frayed, his face lined not with age, but with the deep grooves of choices made in bitterness and pride. This was the Sorcerer, a scholar of names who had looked into the abyss of Sauron's power and found not horror, but a promise of dominion. His eyes held no light, only a cold, calculating hunger that saw the trembling gateway not as a sacred trust, but as a lock to be picked. He did not shout or proclaim his arrival. He simply raised his hands, and his voice, when it came, was a low, discordant chant that grated against the dawn's nascent music. He did not speak words of power so much as he vomited them forth, a stream of twisted, broken names that he and his servant had spent centuries collecting and corrupting. He spoke the true name of a mountain, but he inverted its syllables, turning a song of endurance into a shriek of erosion. He snarled the pure name of a river, warping its fluid melody into a choked gurgle of stagnation and poison. Each perverted name was a hammer blow against the delicate balance of the moment, a spike of pure dissonance driven into the harmonic air around the cliff. The Wraith echoed his master, its voice a hollow amplifier for the corruption, layering the chant with the agonized echoes of the names it had stolen from living things, now weaponized against creation itself. The effect was immediate and violent. The beautiful, trembling veil of light that marked the gateway began to shudder and ripple like a reflection in troubled water. The edges of the potential doorway, which had been shining with a soft, silver promise, now cracked with jagged lines of black energy. The air, which had hummed with potential, now screamed with the strain of being forced. The sorcerer was not seeking to harmonize with the gateway song. He was seeking to overwhelm it, to break its will with a cacophony of lies, and assert his own corrupted narrative as the new, dominant truth. He sought to claim the power of the Grey Havens, not through understanding, but through a brutal, spiritual rape, to make the source of all naming his personal instrument of control. The first true battle for the fate of Middle-earth's identity was not being fought with armies, but with the very language of existence, on a cliff at the edge of the world, as the sun struggled to rise on a dawn that might never properly come. The cliff edge became a battleground of pure sound and intent, a war fought not with steel, but with the very essence of creation. As the sorcerer's discordant chant tore at the trembling veil of light, Alara raised her voice in answer, a single, clear note against a storm of noise. She did not shout to overpower him. She sang to remind the world of its own true nature. Where he snarled a twisted name meant to unravel the strength of stone, she answered with the mountain's true song, a deep, resonant hum of endurance that steadied the shuddering ground beneath their feet. Where he hissed a corrupted name for the sea, turning its life-giving waves into a grasping, suffocating void, she breathed the ancient melody of the ocean's depths, a rhythmic pulse of renewal that pushed back the encroaching dread. Each pure name she spoke was a stitch in the fabric of reality, a desperate act of healing against the sorcerer's relentless work of tearing. Beside her, Arinal fought a different, more tangible war. The shadow wraith, invigorated by its master's fury, did not remain a passive echo. It lunged forward, its form shifting from mist to sharp, solidified claws of darkness, aiming to break Alara's concentration with brute force. Arinal met it with his sword, the polished steel flashing in the strange, fractured light of the breaking dawn. His every swing was a denial, a physical declaration that this corruption would not reach her. He was a whirlwind of motion, parrying strikes that felt less like impacts and more like waves of freezing cold that leached the warmth from his bones and the strength from his muscles. He was not trying to kill the Wraith. He knew such a creature could not be slain by any blade he wielded. His sole purpose was to create a perimeter of safety, to buy Alara the precious seconds she needed to weave her counter song. He was the guardian of the moment, his battle a fierce, desperate dance on the edge of the abyss. Yet the true conflict, the war that would decide everything, was happening in the air between the sorcerer and Alara. It was a duel of identities. The sorcerer's power was drawn from everything he had stolen and broken. His voice was a tapestry of other people's pain, a chorus of stolen memories and violated truths. He fought with the strength of 1,000 unmade names, but it was a hollow, parasitic strength, a scream into a void that echoed only his own emptiness. Alara, in stark contrast, fought with what was given, what was remembered, what was inherently true. Her power was not taken. It was offered in trust by the world she sought to protect. She was a conduit for the unbroken song of the rivers, the forests, the stones, and the stars. Her voice held no aggression, only a profound and unshakable love for the natural order he sought to dismantle. This fundamental difference manifested in the very air around them. The sorcerer's corrupted names did not just sound wrong, they looked wrong. They manifested as jagged, black cracks in the sky, like fractures in a pane of glass, through which a terrible, silent nothingness could be glimpsed. Each one he hurled was an act of erasure, a small annihilation. Alara's true names, however, appeared as threads of shimmering, silver light, weaving through those cracks, sealing them with a gentle, persistent luminescence. She was not attacking the sorcerer, she was repairing the damage he caused, reinforcing reality itself against his assault. The battle was the ultimate expression of their natures, his, a philosophy of control through destruction and theft; hers, a philosophy of preservation through empathy and remembrance. One sought to own the song by silencing all other singers, while the other sought to protect the choir so the song could continue forever. The sorcerer's cold, calculating gaze swept across the chaotic battleground, past Alara's weaving threads of light and the shadow wraith's furious struggle against Arinal's blade. He saw not a hero, but a vulnerability. The ranger was the anchor, the steadfast mortal will that gave the lore keeper her courage. To break him would be to break her. With a dismissive flick of his wrist, he redirected his focus, his chanting faltering for only a second. The torrent of corrupted names did not cease, but it narrowed, coalescing into a single, needle-thin spear of pure negation, aimed directly at Arinal's heart. It was not a physical attack. Arinal did not see it coming. One moment he was parrying a solidified claw of shadow. The next he was on his knees, his sword clattering to the stone as his hands flew to his chest, not in pain, but in a desperate, clawing attempt to hold onto something he could feel being ripped away. The sorcerer's voice, now intimate and venomous, slithered into his mind, bypassing his ears entirely. It did not speak a twisted version of his name. It did not speak a name at all. It spoke the concept of unnaming. It was the sound of a story being erased from a page, of a footprint being washed away by the tide, of a memory dissolving into fog. It was the absolute, terrifying certainty of becoming nothing. Arinal's eyes widened in a horror beyond fear. He could feel the edges of his own self blurring. The memory of his mother's face, the weight of his first sword, the sound of his own laughter, these foundational stones of his identity began to crumble into dust, leaving behind a cold, howling void. He was not being killed, he was being unmade. His very existence was being systematically revoked, and the agony was not of the body, but of the soul. He began to fade, his form becoming translucent, a ghost of himself before he had even died. Alara saw it happen. The silver threads of her protective names faltered as her focus shattered into pure, undiluted terror. To see Arinal, steady, courageous Arinal being erased before her eyes was a violation more profound than any physical wound. Every instinct screamed to pour her power into him, to fight the sorcerer's magic with a name of protection, of strength, of life. But she knew, with a chilling certainty that cut through her panic, that it would not be enough. The sorcerer was using the combined weight of 1,000 stolen names. To counter him with the name of a river or a mountain would be like trying to stop a landslide with a single stone. He was attacking the core of Arinal's identity, and only a truth of equal profundity could possibly stand against it. In that suspended, horrifying moment, she understood what she had to do. It was the ultimate gamble, the most vulnerable act imaginable, to speak her own true name. The secret, unspoken song of her own essence was to hold her naked soul up to the enemy. He could seize it, break it, twist it into a weapon that would destroy her and everything she loved. It was the deepest taboo of her people, the final, inviolable secret. But to remain silent was to watch the man who had become her steadfast friend be wiped from existence as if he had never been. There was no choice, only love. She stopped her song of counter names. She let her hands fall to her sides. She closed her eyes, not to shut out the world, but to look inward, to the very heart of who she was. And then she spoke. It was not a shout, not a spell. It was a whisper, a breath, a single, complex chord of sound that seemed to contain the scent of rain on elven gardens, the quiet wisdom of ancient libraries, the fierce hope of a new dawn, and the unshakable love for a world worth saving. It was her name, not Alara, the label she was called, but the true, secret name that was the sum of all she was and all she hoped to be. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The whispered syllable did not strike the sorcerer's spear of negation. It dissolved it. The power that erupted from her was not a shield or a weapon, but a presence. It was the undeniable, radiant fact of her existence made manifest. It filled the space around her and Arinal with a golden, resonant light that the corrupted magic could not even touch, repelling it not through force, but through sheer, absolute truth. For a breathtaking second, the entire cliffside was silent, the sorcerer's chant choked off by the stunning purity of the revelation. Arinal gasped, a full, deep breath rushing back into his lungs as his form solidified, his memories and his sense of self snapping back into place with the force of a thunderclap. He was whole, saved by the most profound act of trust he could ever witness, but the cost was exacted immediately. As the golden light faded, Alara swayed on her feet, her face as pale as moonlight. The act of speaking her true name had not drained her energy. It had poured her very essence into the world, leaving her feeling hollowed out, scraped clean. She collapsed to her knees, utterly exposed and devastatingly vulnerable, every defense laid bare. The secret was out. Her most powerful weapon was now her greatest weakness, hanging in the air between her and the enemy, a shining prize for the taking. The immense power of Alara's self-revelation still hung in the air, a fading golden echo that had seared away the sorcerer's attack and saved Arinal from oblivion. But that incredible act had left her utterly spent, a vessel emptied of its most essential essence. She knelt on the cold stone, gasping, her body trembling with a profound and terrifying vulnerability. The gateway, the trembling veil of light between the worlds, continued to shudder under the renewed assault of the sorcerer's rage. Enraged by her defiance and the temporary thwarting of his plan, he redoubled his efforts, hurling corrupted names at the portal with the force of a spiritual battering ram. Each twisted syllable was a hammer blow against the delicate fabric of the moment, and the beautiful, harmonic potential of the gateway began to fracture, its light flickering erratically like a guttering candle in a storm. In her weakened state, Alara's first instinct was to fight fire with fire, to find another name of power to shout back, to reinforce the disintegrating door with her will. She reached for the name of the sea, for the strength of the mountain, but the words felt thin and brittle on her lips, their power diluted by her exhaustion and the overwhelming dissonance of the enemy's chant. It was like trying to mend a masterpiece tapestry with frayed thread while someone else slashed at it with a knife. She was losing. The gateway was losing. The cracks of nothingness spread wider, and through them, she could feel the terrible, silent hunger of the void that Sauron sought to unleash upon the world. It was in this moment of impending failure that a new understanding washed over her, a quiet epiphany that rose not from her vast learning, but from the raw, exposed core of her being. Her entire journey had been about the power of speaking, uttering true names to command stone, to heal trees, to summon light. She had seen naming as an active verb, an act of imposition onto the world. But now, as her own voice failed her, she realized that true power was not in speaking alone. It was in listening. The greatest namers were not the loudest shouters. They were the most attentive listeners. To force a name upon the gateway was just another form of domination, a mirror of the sorcerer's own method, albeit with purer intent. To truly commune with it, to save it, she had to stop telling it what to be and instead understand what it already was. She closed her eyes, shutting out the visual chaos of the cracking light, the sorcerer's snarling visage, Arinal's desperate struggle. She let her own racing thoughts settle into stillness. She stopped trying to speak and instead opened her entire being to the frequency of the moment. She listened not with her ears, but with her soul, and beneath the sorcerer's violent discord, beneath the howl of the wind and the crash of the sea far below, she heard it. It was not a word or a song, but a resonance, a single, perfect, unwavering harmonic note that was the gateway's true and eternal name. It was the sound of balance itself, the musical expression of the equinox, the peaceful, patient hum of a door that was meant to be opened with a key of understanding, not broken down with a battering ram of stolen power. This was not a name to be spoken. It was a note to be harmonized with. Letting go of all desire to control, Alara did the most courageous thing she had ever done. She surrendered. She allowed her own depleted spirit to resonate with that pure, foundational note. She didn't sing it. She let it sing through her. It was an act of ultimate trust and empathy, becoming one with the gateway's purpose, rather than seeking to command it. A soft, clear tone began to emanate from her, not from her lips, but from her very presence, a gentle, steady hum that matched the gateway's own hidden frequency. The effect was immediate and profound. Where the sorcerer's shouts were a violent force against the gateway, causing it to shudder and resist, Alara's harmonic resonance was an act of alignment. The frantic flickering of the light began to steady, the jagged cracks sealing themselves not because they were being forced shut, but because the dissonance that had created them was being gently soothed away. The gateway, feeling itself understood and supported, grew stronger, its light shining with a renewed, stable luminescence. It was no longer a victim under assault. It was a partner in its own protection, its inherent stability reinforced by the perfect harmony of a kindred spirit. This shift in the nature of the battle had a devastating effect on the sorcerer. His entire methodology was based on conflict, on the idea that power was taken through overwhelming force. He shouted louder, his voice growing hoarse and ragged, pouring more and more of his stolen energy into the assault. But his corrupted names, which had been so effective against a reality that fought back, now seemed to slide off the newly stabilized gateway like oil off water. The harmony created by Alara's resonance created a field of perfect balance that his discord could not penetrate. The harder he pushed, the more his own power recoiled back upon him, the dissonance of his shouts now shaking his own form, rattling his concentration, and exposing the fundamental emptiness of his stolen strength. He was not just failing, he was weakening himself, his violent energy having nothing to push against but the echo of its own hollow rage. The sorcerer's rage was a physical force, a blast of hot, spiteful wind that tore at Alara's hair and cloak. He had been thwarted, his perfect assault unraveled by a vulnerability. He had not anticipated the sheer, radiant power of a true name, spoken not for gain, but for love. And in that moment of furious humiliation, his strategy shifted from breaking the gateway to breaking her. His eyes, cold voids of calculation, locked onto her kneeling, weakened form. He saw her not as an opponent, but as a treasure chest whose lock had just been sprung, its contents gleaming and undefended. Her true name, the sacred chord of her being, still hung in the air between them, a shimmering, resonant prize. He did not lunge or shout. He began to inhale, a long, sucking pull that seemed to drain the very light from the sky. The air around Alara tightened, constricting like a vice. It was not her body he sought to crush, but her identity. He was drawing her name into himself, seeking to pull that golden, complex cord of sound into the hollow void of his own being, to claim it, own it, and then twist it into a weapon that would forever be his to command. She could feel it, a terrible, pulling sensation at the very core of her soul, as if she were being unraveled from the inside out. Her vision began to dim, the world fading as the essence of who she was being siphoned away. Arinal saw it happening. He saw the sorcerer's focused intent, saw Alara's form beginning to waver and fade just as his own had moments before. He was still locked in his desperate dance with the shadow Wraith, his sword arm aching with the strain of deflecting its freezing claws. There was no time to reach her, no physical way to interpose himself between her and the sorcerer's metaphysical theft. In that split second, he understood that a conventional defense was impossible. But he had already learned the most valuable lesson of this war. The greatest power often lies not in force, but in sacrifice. He made his choice without hesitation. He stopped fighting the Wraith. He dropped his sword, the clatter of steel on stone lost in the howl of the wind. Instead of attacking, he turned inward, gathering not his strength, but his memory. He gathered the sound of his mother's laughter, the feel of the first bow he ever held, the steadfast loyalty he had for his friends, the courage he had found on this very cliff, all the things that made him Arinal. And then, with a final, loving look at Alara, he did not speak his name. He offered it up. He took the totality of his identity, the beautiful, messy, human story of who he was, and he hurled it not as a weapon, but as a distraction, a shining, multifaceted mirror directly into the path of the sorcerer's sucking pull. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for the spell. The sorcerer, whose entire being was geared toward the theft and consumption of names, was suddenly and violently presented with a second, powerful identity hurtling toward him. His parasitic magic, already latched onto Alara's essence, now tried to greedily seize this new offering as well. The two streams of identity, Alara's elven purity and Arinal's human complexity, collided within the sorcerer's mind, a dissonant clash of two profound truths that his hollow core could not possibly process. The feedback was immense. The sorcerer screamed, a raw, agonized sound, as his own consciousness short-circuited. The spell shattered, releasing Alara from its pull, but the damage to the caster was far deeper. In that chaotic overload, the sorcerer forgot the most important name of all, his own, the carefully constructed persona of the powerful master, the narrative of control and bitterness he had wrapped himself in for centuries, vanished into a blinding white static of confusion. He stood utterly still, his eyes wide and vacant, a man who had just misplaced the thread of his own existence. Alara, gasping and released from the terrible pulling sensation, saw the opening. She saw the sorcerer's momentary lapse, the blank slate of confusion where his malice had been, and in that fleeting window, she did not see an enemy to be destroyed. She saw a wound to be healed. She remembered Elrond's words in Rivendell, that to misuse a name is to unravel reality itself. The greatest counter to such a violation was not a more powerful violation, but an act of restoration. Drawing on the last dregs of her strength, fueled by Arinal's incredible sacrifice, she did not reach for a name of power from the world around her. She reached into the deepest, most compassionate part of her memory, to the oldest tales of the Second Age, to the histories that spoke of the great scholars and guardians who had first stood against the shadow before they fell. She found it, a name not of darkness, but of light, the name he had been given at his birth, a name that meant stone of the singing shore, a name that spoke of strength and music, and a connection to the world he would later seek to dominate. She did not shout it as a weapon. She spoke it as a gift, her voice soft, clear, and brimming with a profound, aching pity. She spoke it not to command him, but to remind him. It was an echo from a time before the bitterness, before the pride, before the long, slow surrender to the shadow's empty promises. It was the name of the man he could have been, the guardian he was meant to be, offered back to him like a precious heirloom he had forgotten he owned. The name struck the sorcerer's vacant consciousness, not as a blow, but as a key turning in a long rusted lock. The blank confusion in his eyes shattered, replaced by a wave of overwhelming, agonizing memory. He did not remember his life of power. He remembered his life of purpose. He saw the young man who had stood on a different shore, full of idealism, sworn to protect the beautiful, fragile music of creation. He saw the first compromise, the first taste of power used for control instead of care, the slow and insidious corrosion of his original oath. The weight of every stolen name, every corrupted song, every act of unraveling he had ever performed crashed down upon him at once, seen now through the clear, unforgiving lens of his original, true self. The remorse was not a gentle regret, it was a cataclysm. The name hung in the air between them, not as a weapon, but as a gift, a precious, forgotten thing gently laid at his feet. For the sorcerer, the effect was not a gentle remembering, but a cataclysm. The single, pure syllable of his true name acted like a key, turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for centuries. The meticulously constructed fortress of his pride, his bitterness, his entire identity as a master of stolen power, did not just crack, it dissolved. In its place flooded a torrent of memory, a lifetime of choices, seen now through the clear, unforgiving lens of who he was meant to be. He saw not the powerful sorcerer, but the young scholar in the white towers of old, his hands tracing ancient scripts, not to possess their power, but to understand their beauty. He remembered the solemn oath he had sworn to the first namers, to be a guardian, a preserver, a keeper of the sacred songs of creation. The weight of every corrupted name, every stolen memory, every act of unraveling he had ever performed, crashed down upon him all at once. The shame was a physical force, a white-hot agony that dwarfed any physical wound. He had not merely chosen a dark path, he had desecrated his own sacred vow. He had become the very thing he was sworn to protect the world from. A raw, broken sound escaped his lips, a sob that was also a surrender, the resolve to dominate, to control, to own, the very core of his being for ages, shattered into dust, leaving behind only the hollowed-out shell of the guardian he had once been. His gaze, once cold with calculating hunger, now swam with a grief so profound it seemed to alter the very air around him. That grief then sharpened into a new, desperate focus as it fell upon the shadow wraith. The creature, its master's will suddenly absent, hesitated, its form flickering with confusion. It was a thing of pure negation, a void given purpose only by his command. In that moment of the sorcerer's clarity, the wraith was not a servant. It was the embodiment of his every failure, a walking, whispering monument to his corruption. A final defiant flame of his original purpose ignited within him, not for his own salvation, but for atonement. With the last vestiges of his strength drawn not from stolen power, but from the raw truth of his remorse, he raised a trembling hand toward the creature. His voice, when it came, was a ragged whisper, yet it carried the authority of a rediscovered truth. He did not speak a name of destruction or a word of banishment to some outer darkness. He spoke a name of binding, of order, the true, ancient name for a vessel that is meant to contain, to hold, to prevent harm. It was the name of a sacred urn, a concept of perfect, sealed closure. He was not destroying the wraith. He was giving its formless malice a defined shape and a permanent prison, neutralizing its chaos with an act of profound imposition of order. The wraith shrieked, a sound of pure, betrayed fury, as its shifting, shadowy form was compressed and drawn inward, collapsing into a small, obsidian black sphere that hovered for a moment in the air before clattering to the stone at the sorcerer's feet, inert and silent. The victory was absolute, but it was his last. The effort of wielding such a pure, powerful name in his broken state, with a heart freshly torn open by regret, was too much. The recoil of the magic, or perhaps simply the final relinquishing of the dark energy that had sustained his prolonged life, overwhelmed him. He crumpled to the ground, his body failing, the light in his eyes already beginning to dim as the life poured out of a wound that was far more spiritual than it was physical. The terrible silence that followed the wraith's imprisonment was broken only by the ragged, failing breath of the sorcerer. The violent cracks in the gateway had sealed, the trembling veil of light now steady and radiant, humming with the pure, balanced harmony Alara had helped it find. The immediate threat was gone, but the cost lay stark before them. Arinal was already at Alara's side, helping her to her feet, his own face etched with the ghost of the unmaking he had narrowly escaped. Together, they turned to the source of that labored breathing. The sorcerer lay propped against a cold, sea-washed rock, his fine robes dark with blood that was not entirely physical. It was the seepage of a spirit that had been torn asunder by its own remorse. The cold calculation was gone from his eyes, replaced by a pain so profound, it seemed to look out from a different man entirely. He was not the powerful master of stolen names anymore. He was a dying scholar, finally seeing the ruins of his own life's work with devastating clarity. As Alara approached, he lifted a trembling hand, not in threat, but in a feeble, desperate gesture. On his finger was a ring, but it was unlike any she had ever seen. It was not gold or silver, but seemed wrought of a dark, smoky crystal that swirled with captured light, and set within it was not a gem, but a shifting, liquid rune that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. With a final, grating effort, he pulled the ring from his finger, the motion seeming to cost him the last of his strength. He did not hold it out as a prize, but offered it like a burden, a terrible weight he was finally relinquishing. "Take it," he whispered, his voice a dry leaf scratching on stone. "It is a tool of the namers of old. It can focus the will, magnify the intent behind a spoken name." His breath hitched, a spasm of pain racking his frame. With it, you can heal a forest with a whisper or blight a kingdom with a thought. It does not judge. It only amplifies what is in the heart of the one who wields it. I used it to break. You must use it to mend. The weight of the ring in Alara's palm was immense, far heavier than its physical form suggested. It felt like holding a concentrated drop of possibility, both beautiful and terrifying, but the sorcerer was not finished. His hand, now bare and frail, gripped her wrist with a surprising, final strength, his eyes burning with one last, urgent warning. "Do not think this is over," he hissed, the words carrying the chill of an absolute and certain truth. This was but a skirmish, a test of his strategy. Sauron learned what he needed to learn today. He coughed, a dark stain appearing at the corner of his mouth. He learned that your strength is real. And he learned that true names are not just a path to power, they are the foundation of it. They are the bedrock of reality itself. To control them is to control what is real, what is true, what is permitted to exist. His gaze drifted past her, toward the now stable gateway, and a profound, weary fear entered his expression. He will never stop. He cannot. His entire being is now bent toward one purpose, to own the song of creation. He will send other agents, craftier and more powerful. He will seek out the oldest, most fundamental names, the true names of the wind, of the sea, of time itself, and he will try to claim them, to rewrite them in his own image. If he succeeds, the world will not be conquered, it will be convinced. It will forget it was ever anything else. It will become a world that always belonged to him, because its very language will be his. His grip tightened one last time, a final spark of the guardian he had once been flaring in his eyes. You are not fighting an army. You are fighting a lie that seeks to become the only truth. Remember that. Guard the names, all of them. With that last, desperate exhortation, the strength fled his body. The light in his eyes faded, not into the cold void of the sorcerer, but into the quiet peace of a man who had, at the very end, remembered his own name. He was gone. The cliff was silent once more, save for the crash of the waves below and the soft, harmonic hum of the gateway. But the peace felt fragile, thin. In Alara's hand, the ring pulsed with a faint, warm light, a tool of immense power and an even greater responsibility. A constant reminder that the war for the soul of Middle-earth had just truly begun, and its most crucial battles would be fought not with swords, but with syllables. The moment their feet passed through the shimmering veil of light, the very concept of the cliff, the sea, and the sky dissolved into a brilliance that was not harsh, but profoundly gentle. It was not like stepping into a new place, but into a new state of being. The air itself was luminous, humming with a soft, golden light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once, carrying within it the faint, beautiful echoes of the first songs ever sung. They stood not on ground, but on a surface that felt like solidified memory, a pathway of light that curved away into a landscape of impossible beauty. Here, towering trees of crystalline light grew alongside structures that were both building and living tree, their forms shifting and flowing in a slow, graceful dance. This was not the Grey Havens as a port city, but the Grey Havens as an idea, the living heart of all naming, the wellspring of identity itself. They had taken only a few awestruck steps when the air before them coalesced and a figure appeared. She was an elf, but unlike any Alara had ever seen in Rivendell. Her age was not marked by wrinkles, but by a depth of presence that made the very light seem to bend toward her in reverence. Her eyes held the light of countless dawns, and when she spoke, her voice was the sound of a calm, deep river flowing over ancient stones. "I am Surion," she said, and the name was not just an introduction, but a quiet fact that settled into the fabric of the realm around them, as undeniable as the existence of the air they breathed. "You have journeyed far, and you have been tested by shadow, but the tests of darkness are simple compared to the tests of light. Here, we do not measure what you know, but why you wish to know it." Surion did not ask them to state their purpose. Instead, she simply gestured with a hand, and the realm itself responded. A simple, wooden cup appeared, hovering in the air between them. It was plain, unadorned, crafted from a single piece of pale birch. "This vessel is empty," Surion said. "Give it a name." The instruction was deceptively simple. Arinal glanced at Alara, the practical ranger in him, expecting a test of complex lore or hidden knowledge. Alara, her mind still reeling from the profound nature of this place, understood the trap immediately. To give it a grand, powerful name would be an act of imposition, of trying to define it from the outside. To give it a simple, descriptive name might be an act of preservation, of acknowledging what it already was. Alara hesitated, then spoke softly. "I would call it Holder of the Gift," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The cup glowed with a soft, silver light for a moment, then faded back to its plain state. Surion's expression was unreadable. Arinal, drawing on his own hard-won wisdom, spoke next. "To me, it is the carved piece," he said, honoring its simple craftsmanship and the potential for it to hold water for a thirsty traveler. The cup glowed with a warm, amber light, slightly brighter and longer than before, but still it settled back into its inert form. Surion smiled, a small, sad curve of her lips. "You see," she said, not to them, but to the air around them. "The first impulse, even for the well-intentioned, is to name based on function, on potential, on what it can do for you. You see a cup, and you think of what it can hold. This is not wrong, but it is a beginning, not an end." She reached out and touched the cup, and as her fingers made contact, she did not speak a name. She breathed a single, quiet note that sounded like the sigh of a forest after a gentle rain. The cup did not glow, it transformed. It became more itself. The grain of the wood seemed to deepen, telling the story of the tree it came from. It radiated a sense of quiet completeness, of being perfectly and wholly a cup, with no need for a purpose to justify its existence. This is the heart of the matter, Surion explained, her gaze encompassing them both. A name is not a leash to control a thing's purpose. It is a mirror to reflect its truth. The shadow you fight believes that to name a thing is to own it, to dictate its function. To name a river is to command its flow. To name a mountain is to permit or deny its stillness. This is the path of dominion. It is a lonely path, for it sets the namer above and apart from all they name, a master shouting orders into a void that slowly forgets how to answer with its own voice. She turned, and the landscape around them shifted subtly, the light showing them visions of what she described, a world where every tree, stone, and stream was forced into a single, rigid purpose, its beauty and spontaneity stripped away, leaving only stark, efficient utility. The other path, she continued, her voice now softening with a profound warmth, is the path of preservation. To name a thing is to understand it, to celebrate its existence, to enter into a relationship with it. When you speak the true name of the wind, you do not tell it where to blow. You understand why it blows, and you harmonize with its journey. This path does not place you above creation, but within it. You become part of the great chorus, not its conductor. Her ancient eyes, full of an immeasurable sorrow and a bottomless hope, fixed on them, Sauron's great weakness, the flaw that will forever keep him from true power, is his refusal to acknowledge any name but his own. He believes himself to be the only I in a universe of its. He cannot comprehend a power that is shared, a song that is sung together. He thinks our reverence for the true names of things is a weakness, when it is, in fact, the source of all strength. To defeat him, you must not try to shout louder than he does. You must do the one thing he finds utterly incomprehensible. You must give strength away. You must use your gift not to command, but to remind others of their own true names, to help them remember their own power. You must strengthen the chorus until his solitary, discordant shout is drowned out by the beautiful, united music of a world that knows itself and refuses to forget. The lesson was not a test they had passed or failed. It was a fundamental truth being rewoven into the very core of their understanding, changing them from the inside out. Surion's words settled not just in their minds, but in the very substance of that luminous realm, as if the truth she spoke was woven directly into the air they breathed. Her gaze, ancient and impossibly gentle, held them with the weight of eons. "You have seen the shadows work," she said, her voice a soft melody that resonated with the hum of the realm itself. "You have witnessed how it seeks to own, to control, to claim a name as a possession to be locked away or twisted into a tool. But this is a fundamental error, a lie that corrupts the very nature of what a name is." She paused, allowing the silence to emphasize her next words. A name is not a thing to be owned. It is a truth to be shared. It is a bridge of understanding between beings, a way of saying I see you, I know you, I honor what you are. She gestured around them to the crystalline trees and the structures of living light. In this place, we do not hoard the names of things as a dragon hoards gold. To do so would be to isolate oneself, to build a fortress of solitude where the only voice you hear is your own echo. That is the path of the enemy, Sauron's great weakness. The fatal flaw in his design for the world is not a lack of power, it is a poverty of spirit. He refuses to acknowledge any name but his own. He believes that by making everything an extension of his will, by reducing the vast, beautiful chorus of creation to a single, monotonous note, he will become the master of all. But in truth, he only succeeds in making himself profoundly, eternally alone. He is a singer who has forgotten all other songs, and so his own voice has become a hollow screech into an empty void. The lesson was a revelation that recontextualized everything Alara had learned. Her studies in Rivendell had often focused on the power inherent in a name, the authority it could grant. But Surion was revealing a deeper, more profound power, the power of connection. To defeat a force that seeks to isolate and dominate, Surion continued, her eyes now fixed on Alara with an intensity that felt both loving and stern. You must become its absolute opposite. Your strategy cannot be to gather more power for yourself, to find a bigger, more potent name to shout him down. That would only mean you are playing his game, and he has had millennia to master it. Know your path. The only path that leads to true victory is to do the one thing he finds utterly incomprehensible. You must give power away. Alara felt a tremor of uncertainty. Give it away, but the enemy is so strong. How can we become stronger by making ourselves weaker? Surion's smile was like the first break of dawn after a long night. You are thinking of power as a finite resource, like water in a cup. If you give some away, you have less, but the magic of names is not like that. It is a living energy that grows through sharing. Think of a single candle flame. If you use it to light another candle, you do not diminish the first flame. You have created more light. This is the way of the true namer. Your purpose is not to be the brightest flame, but to ensure that the entire hall is illuminated. She leaned forward, her presence becoming the entire focus of the world. Your quest, Alara, is not to find a weapon. It is to become a catalyst, where the shadow seeks to unname, to silence, to make the world forget. You must do the opposite. You must remind the river of its song. You must help the mountain remember its strength. You must look into the heart of a person who has been convinced they are nothing, and you must speak their truth back to them until they believe it again. You do not fight the darkness by shouting at it. You fight it by lighting so many candles that the shadows have nowhere left to hide. You strengthen the names of others, and in doing so, you weave a network of light and truth that his solitary voice cannot break. You make the world remember itself, and a world that knows its own name is a world that can never truly be conquered. Surion's lesson settled deep within Alara's spirit, reshaping her understanding of power from something held to something shared. The time for theory was over. The ancient namer led her to a vast, open space within the luminous realm, where the air itself seemed to pulse with anticipation. This was not a stage for performance, but a sacred workshop for realignment. The ritual is simple in concept, but it will demand everything you have ever learned and unlearned, Surion explained, her voice blending with the ambient hum. You will speak true names, but you must speak them without a single thread of desire for control. You must not ask for anything, command anything, or seek to change anything. You must only offer understanding, and then listen for the answer. The first presence she felt was the wind. It was not the wild, rushing gale of the mountain passes, but the essence of movement itself, the ancient breath of the world that had carried the seeds of the first trees and the songs of the first elves. In the past, Alara might have sought its name to calm a storm or speed a journey, to impose her will upon its nature. Now, she closed her eyes and stilled that impulse. She reached out with her spirit, not to grasp, but to appreciate. She felt the joy of its freedom, the purpose of its journeys from the icy peaks to the warm seas, the vital role it played in the great cycle of life. And when she spoke, her voice was not a tool, but a mirror. She spoke its true name, and the name was not a word of power, but a story of endless journeying and constant connection. The response was instantaneous and breathtaking. The luminous air around her coalesced into a shimmering, playful vortex that danced around her, not obeying, but communing. It carried the scent of 1,000 forgotten blossoms and the echo of laughter from ages past. It wove through her hair with a gentleness that felt like a blessing, and as it touched her, she felt a wave of pure, unadulterated joy flow from it into her, and from her back into it. It was a circuit of mutual recognition, a strengthening of a bond that had always existed but had been neglected. Where the shadow had sought to still the winds, to silence their song, Alara's act of pure naming had reinforced their essence, making them more vibrantly themselves. The very fabric of the air seemed to grow clearer, more resonant, as if a thin layer of dust had been wiped from reality itself. Emboldened by this connection, Alara turned her awareness next to the water. She did not look for a stream or a wave, but for the concept of flow itself, the patient, persistent truth that carves canyons from stone and gives life to every living thing. She remembered the horror of the corrupted river spirit, its name stolen, leaving it confused and hostile. She pushed that memory aside, focusing not on what had been done to it, but on what it eternally was. She found its name, a complex, fluid melody that spoke of deep patience, of cycles of evaporation and rain, of the silent strength that holds up the great ships and nourishes the smallest root. She spoke the name not as a command to be clean or to flow in a certain direction, but as an acknowledgement, a celebration of its eternal nature. The realm responded. A fountain of liquid light sprang from the pathway before her, not water as she knew it, but the pure idea of water, shimmering and dancing in the air. It did not splash or wet her. It flowed around her in graceful, harmonious patterns, each droplet singing a note in a vast, aquatic chord. She felt a profound sense of peace and cleansing wash over her, not just over her, but through the very concept of water within the realm. It was as if a wound had been healed, a scar of the shadow's attempted corruption, soothed away by the simple, powerful act of being seen and honored for what it truly was. The water's joy was a quiet, deep thrum of contentment that vibrated in her bones. Finally, she grounded herself in the stone, not the cold, unfeeling rock the world often saw, but the deep, slow consciousness of the earth, the unwavering foundation upon which all else was built. She thought of the cliff that had shielded them from the Orcs, how it had responded not to a command, but to a reminder of its own steadfast nature. She found its true name, a slow, grinding, profound bass note that held the memory of continents shifting and mountains rising. It was a name of immense patience and unwavering support. She spoke it, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of epochs. Beneath her feet, the pathway of light solidified into something more. It became tangible, real, radiating a gentle, warming heat that spoke of the heart of the world, A sense of absolute stability and safety flowed up through her, an unshakable confidence that the ground would not give way. It was the opposite of the shifting, treacherous paths the shadow Wraith had created. This was reality asserting itself, stronger and more vibrant for having been truly seen and named without any desire to mine it, carve it, or build upon it. The stone's joy was not a celebration, but a deep, satisfied hum of rightness, of being perfectly and completely what it was always meant to be. As the last echo of the stone's name faded, Alara opened her eyes. The realm was the same, and yet utterly transformed. The light was brighter, the colors deeper, the harmonies richer and more complex. It was as if a tapestry that had been faded by time had been meticulously restored to its original, brilliant hues. She had not changed the world. She had reminded it of its own beauty, and in doing so, allowed it to become more fully itself. The ritual was not about gaining power, but about participating in a mutual act of reinforcement. Each time, a true name was spoken with selfless intent. The world's fabric grew stronger, more resilient against the efforts of those who would seek to unravel it. The damage done by the enemy was not healed by opposition, but by a louder, more joyful chorus of what was true. The luminous air of the Grey Havens seemed to hold its breath as Surion's ancient, knowing gaze shifted from Alara to the ranger, standing steadfastly beside her. Aaron had remained silent throughout the ritual, a quiet guardian in a realm of profound magic, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword, not in readiness for a fight, but as a touchstone to the tangible world he understood. He had witnessed the transformation, seen the wind and water dance with joy at being truly seen, and while he could not perform such magic himself, he now understood its essence, not as a tool of control, but as a language of deep respect. His journey had begun with a dismissive laugh at the concept of name magic, seeing it as a frivolous theory against the harsh realities of orc blades and survival. He had evolved into a man who defended that magic with his very life, and who had, in a moment of ultimate sacrifice, offered up the totality of his own identity to save it. He was a warrior of deeds, not words, and he believed his part in this celestial drama was one of support, not center stage, which is why the deep, resonant silence that followed Alara's ritual was broken not for her, but for him. Surion did not look at him with pity, or with the condescension a great power might show a mere mortal. She looked upon him with a reverence that was entirely genuine, her eyes seeing the story written in his soul, not in elven script, but in the simpler, starker language of choice and courage. "And you," she said, her voice softening from its teaching tone into something more personal, more honoring. "You who came to this truth, not by birthright or ancient study, but through the harder path of doubt, of struggle, and of proven loyalty. You have wielded a different kind of power, one just as vital. You have shown that a true name is not only spoken, it is lived. You have written yours in every step you took to protect her, in every instinct you trusted over fear, in the profound gift of your own memory when it was all you had left to give." She stepped toward him, and the light of the realm seemed to bend and gather around her outstretched hand. "The world of names has its own laws of reciprocity," she continued. "A gift of such magnitude cannot go unanswered. You offered all that you were without any thought of reward. So now, we offer you a reflection of that self, seen through a clearer lens." Her fingers did not touch him, but passed through the air just above his heart, and where they traced, a soft, silver light lingered, forming the shape of a star. In the language of the first dawn, the language of pure meaning, we would name you Arinal. The word hung in the air, a complex chord of sound that somehow contained the steadfastness of the northern star, the guidance it offers to lost travelers, and the hopeful, piercing light that breaks through the deepest darkness. It signifies King's Star, not as a title of dominion over others, but as a declaration of the sovereignty you have earned over your own spirit, and the light you now provide for those who journey beside you. The name settled over him not as a weight, but as a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was closed. It did not change who he was, it clarified it. It was not an elven title meant to elevate him above his station, but a profound acknowledgement of the kingly nature of his own choices, his courage, his sacrifice, his unwavering loyalty. He had spent his life as a ranger, a protector of boundaries, often unseen and unthanked. This was not a demand that he become something else, but a validation that those quiet acts of guardianship were seen and were, in their own right, a form of royalty. He felt no surge of pride, but a deep, humbling sense of rightness, as if a part of himself he'd always sensed but never fully recognized had finally been spoken into being. He looked first at Alara, seeing the joyful tears shimmering in her eyes, and then back to Surion. He did not bow or offer formal thanks. Instead, he simply placed his own hand over his heart, where the echo of the name still glowed warmly. "I accept this," he said, his voice rough with emotion but clear with conviction. "Not as a crown, but as a vow, a promise to continue protecting the light in whatever way I can." In that moment, the last vestiges of the skeptical ranger who had met an elf on a forest road truly dissolved. The man who remained was Arinal, a believer not just in the magic of names, but in the power of the heart that chooses to defend them. His journey was complete, not because he had reached a destination, but because he had fully integrated the truth of his own worth, finding his permanent and honored place, not on the periphery of the story, but woven into its very core. The transition back from the luminous, harmonic realm of the Grey Havens to the tangible reality of Middle-earth was not a gentle homecoming, it was a visceral shock. The air, once thrumming with the pure music of creation, now felt thin and muted, carrying a faint, sickly sweet scent of decay. The vibrant greens of the forests they passed seemed washed out, the songs of the birds fragmented and listless. The strength they carried within them, Alara's profound mastery of naming as communion, Arinal's clarified sense of purpose, was immediately met with a world that was actively being weakened. Their victory on the cliffside had not ended the war. It had merely revealed its true, horrifying scale. Sauron, having learned the potency of their defense, had shifted his strategy from targeted assaults to a campaign of widespread erasure. The first village they came upon was a portrait of silent despair. It was not a scene of destruction by fire or sword. The houses stood intact, the fields were still tended, but the life had been drained from the place. People moved through the lanes like sleepwalkers, their faces blank, their eyes hollow. They did not respond to greetings. They did not speak to each other. A mother sat on her doorstep, mechanically rocking a silent child, her gaze fixed on nothing. A blacksmith stood before his cold forge, his hammer hanging limp in his hand, as if he had forgotten what to do with it. The very air was thick with a profound, unnatural silence, broken only by the wind, which itself sounded weary and confused. Alara's heart clenched with a cold dread. This was not an attack on the body, but on the soul. She approached a young man staring at a water well, his expression one of utter perplexity. "What troubles you?" she asked softly. He turned his empty eyes to her, and after a long moment, he whispered, I cannot remember." His voice was raspy from disuse. "Remember what?" She pressed, her voice gentle. A single tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek. "My name," he confessed, the words filled with a terror that went deeper than any fear of physical harm. "I was coming to draw water, and I stopped, and I could not remember why I was here, or who I was coming for. I know I have a family. I feel I should know them. But their faces are blurred in my mind, and the word I call my wife, it feels wrong on my tongue, like a lie. He was not injured, he was unraveled. His identity, the story of himself that connected his past to his present and gave purpose to his future, had been severed. He was a vessel slowly emptying, a book whose pages were being gently, systematically bleached of their ink. Arinal moved through the village, his ranger's eyes now seeing the invisible wounds. He found the source of the blight not in a physical enemy, but in the land itself. At the village's edge, where the protective wooden fence met the wild, he found it. Carved into the trunk of an ancient, guardian oak were the same jagged, angular symbols they had seen in the old forest. But these were fresher, pulsing with a more aggressive, malevolent energy. This was not the work of a single shadow wraith. It was a template, a seed of silence planted by Sauron's forces and left to germinate. The false name carved into the tree was not aimed at the tree itself, but acted as a spiritual poison well, its influence seeping into the earth and the water table, leaching into the minds of all who lived within its radius. The people were not being attacked directly. They were breathing it in, drinking it, sleeping atop it. They were forgetting because the very ground beneath their feet was being persuaded to forget its own nature, and in doing so, it could no longer sustain the identities of those who depended on it. The horror of it was its insidious simplicity. An army could be fought, a fortress could be besieged. How does one fight a silence? How does one wage war against a rumor that infects the bedrock of reality? Alara understood now the full meaning of Surion's warning. Sauron was not trying to conquer the world. He was trying to convince it. He was replacing its vibrant, complex truth with a single, hollow lie, the lie that it had never been anything at all. And as they traveled on, they saw that the village was not an isolated tragedy. Whole regions were falling under this creeping pall. They passed farms where the crops grew gray and tasteless, not blighted by pestilence, but because the concept of growth itself was fading from the land. They crossed a river that moved in sluggish, silent loops, its waters becoming thick and murky, as if it had forgotten its passionate journey to the sea. The very land was beginning to fade at the edges, colors leaching away into a dull monotony of grays and browns, the world becoming a ghost of itself, a memory on the verge of being completely forgotten. Their quest was no longer a race to a single location. It was a desperate, sprawling battle to rekindle a million dying lights before the entire map of Middle-earth was redrawn in shades of nothingness. Their journey became a pilgrimage through a wounded land, a desperate healing mission against a tide of forgetting. The ring on Alara's finger, a tool of such terrifying potential, now felt like an extension of her own will, its dark crystal pulsing in time with her heartbeat. In each blighted village and silent forest glen, they found the same chilling tableau, people moving through the motions of life, like puppets with their strings cut, their inner lights dimmed by the corrosive lies etched into the very world around them. The work of restoration was not a simple act of speaking a word. It was a delicate and perilous surgery on the soul of Middle-earth itself. Their first true test came in a small hamlet nestled in the shadow of the misty mountains, a place where the silence was so profound it felt like a physical weight. The source of the decay was a runestone at the village center, an ancient marker that had once borne the true name of the valley, a word that meant sheltered song. Now, that name had been scarred over with the same jagged, angular script they had seen before, a false name that whispered of the still hollow into the minds of all who lived there. Alara approached the stone, her hand trembling slightly as she reached out. Arinal stood guard, his eyes scanning the eerily still lanes, his sword drawn not against a physical foe, but against the oppressive dread that clung to the air. As Alara's fingers neared the corrupted rune, the residual darkness fought back. It was not an intelligent force, but a mindless, reactive venom left behind by the sorcerer's magic. The air around the stone grew icy cold, and a wave of despair and confusion crashed into her mind, trying to convince her that her own name was meaningless, that her quest was futile, that the world was always meant to be this silent, gray place. It was a psychological assault designed to break her focus and her spirit. Gritting her teeth, she focused on the ring, not as an amplifier of her own power, but as a lens for her intent. She poured her memory of what the valley had been, the sound of children's laughter, echoing off the slopes, the cheerful clang of the smithy, the warm light in the windows at dusk, into the crystal. She did not command the stone to be clean. She reminded it of the song it was meant to hold. Then, she spoke the valley's true name. The effect was not instantaneous. The dark script fought back, pulsing with a sickly light, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed it would not yield. But then, like a crack spreading through ice, the jagged lines began to soften and blur. The false name dissolved under the weight of the truth, and as the original, graceful runes of sheltered song re-emerged, a palpable wave of warmth and sound washed out from the stone. It was as if a held breath was finally released. In the lanes around them, people stumbled, blinking as if waking from a deep sleep. A woman dropped her basket, her hand flying to her mouth as she looked around and truly saw her home for the first time in weeks. A child began to cry, not in fear, but in relief, calling out for his mother with a name he suddenly remembered. The restoration was a fragile, beautiful victory, but it left Alara drained and shaking, the echo of the darkness's resistance a cold ache in her bones. Each success was hard-won and followed the same harrowing pattern. In a forest where the trees had forgotten how to whisper, Alara had to walk among them for a full day and night, speaking the true name of each species of oak and elm, of the moss and the lichen, her voice growing hoarse as she rebuilt the chorus of the wood from the root up. In a coastal town where the fishermen had forgotten the sea's rhythms, she and Arinal had to sail a skiff into the bay so she could sing the true names of the currents and the tides into the water itself, while the residual shadow in the depths tried to capsize them with sudden, unnatural waves. The ring magnified her intent, but it also magnified the cost. Each act of naming was an act of profound empathy, of taking the world's pain and confusion into herself and transmuting it back into order, and the effort left her paler and more weary each time. Yet, with every name restored, a tiny pocket of resistance was forged. The light did not just return, it burned brighter for having been lost. The people of the sheltered Song Valley, once they had reclaimed their identities, became fiercely protective of their runestone, forming a round-the-clock watch to ensure it would never be defiled again. The fishermen, remembering the sea's true song, found their nets fuller than ever before, and they began to sing their own old shanties as they worked, their voices a new layer in the harmonic defense of their home. These were not just restorations, they were inoculations. Each healed place became a beacon, its reaffirmed identity, creating a small but resilient bulwark against the spreading silence. The hope they fueled was not a naive optimism, but a hardened, active resistance, a network of tiny lights beginning to push back against the vast, encroaching dark, proving that even the smallest remembered truth could be a weapon against the great lie of oblivion. The silence of the blighted villages was a creeping horror, but the news that reached them from a frantic messenger on the road spoke of a danger of an entirely different magnitude. Sauron's strategy was evolving, no longer content with poisoning isolated hamlets and forests. He was now aiming for an artery of life itself. The great river Anduin, the mighty waterway that flowed from the misty peaks of the north all the way to the sea in the south, was his next target. The messenger, a gaunt man with the wild eyes of one who has seen his world begin to dissolve, spoke in a breathless rush. The river, it grows slow and thick. The fish float belly up, not dead, but empty. The farmers who drink from it forget their children's names. They say the river itself is forgetting how to be a river. The implications were catastrophic. The Anduin was not just a body of water, it was the circulatory system for a vast swath of Middle-earth. Countless towns, cities, and entire ecosystems depended on its flow. Its waters irrigated the fields of Rohan and Gondor. Its currents carried trade barges. Its banks were home to creatures beyond number. To unname the Anduin would be to unravel the very concept of a river in that region. The water would not vanish. It would become a stagnant, purposeless sludge, a liquid amnesia that would poison every living thing that touched it. The life downstream would not just be disrupted, it would be fundamentally unmade, its connection to the source of all life severed. This was not an attack on a place, but on a principle. Their race was no longer against a creeping shadow, it was against a tidal wave of oblivion. They had to reach the river's source before Sauron's agents could complete their work. The journey was a blur of exhaustion and dread, a forced march north into the increasingly rugged and lonely foothills where the air grew thin and the world felt raw and newborn. The familiar signs of blight were here too, but they were different, not a forgetting, but a twisting. The few streams that fed the great river's headwaters ran in frantic, contradictory loops, as if confused about which way was down. The very sound of the water was changing from a confident roar to a discordant, anxious babble. They found the source not in a single spring, but in a hidden, high valley cradled by jagged peaks, a place of breathtaking, primal beauty that was now thrumming with a palpable wrongness. A crystalline lake, fed by melting snows, should have been the picture of purity. Instead, its surface was unnaturally still, like dark glass, and the waterfalls that fed it did not crash joyfully, but spilled over the cliffs in slow, syrupy sheets. and in the center of the lake, a figure stood upon the water. It was the guardian spirit of the Anduin, but it was a ghost of its true self. Its form, which should have been a shimmering, cohesive being of water and light, was fractured and unstable. One moment, it appeared as a majestic, flowing entity with the strength of the current in its shoulders. The next, it would flicker and distort into a jagged, furious shape made of ice and sharp edges. This was the heart of the crisis, the spirit's true name, the song that bound it to its purpose and gave the river its identity, had not been fully stolen, but savagely wounded. Crucial syllables had been scraped away, leaving its essence riddled with gaps and contradictions. It was like a grand musical score, with entire sections torn out, leaving only dissonant notes that clashed against each other. The spirit was no longer the confident guardian of the river's journey. It was a confused, pain-racked entity, lashing out at the very world it was meant to protect. It could feel the immense importance of its duty, but it could no longer remember how to perform it, and that forgotten purpose had curdled into a hostile, paranoid energy. It saw Alara and Arinal not as allies, but as more intruders come to finish the job of its unmaking, another threat to a self it could no longer fully comprehend. The fractured spirit of the Anduin did not see a potential savior in Alara. It saw only another vibration in the agonizing dissonance that had become its existence. As she stepped to the water's edge, its form, a swirling vortex of half-remembered purpose and lashing pain, coalesced into a spear of jagged ice and hurled it toward her with a shriek that was the sound of a river forgetting its own song. Arinal's sword was a blur, deflecting the projectile with a shower of freezing shards that stung their faces. "It's too far gone to reason with," he shouted over the spirit's tormented wail. "It can't hear you through its own pain." But Alara knew reason was not the tool for this. The spirit was not an enemy to be fought. It was a wound to be sutured. Its rage was a symptom, not the cause. The cause was the gaps in its name, the missing syllables that had left its essence unfinished and unstable, like a bridge with keystones removed. To heal it, she would need to do the most delicate work of her life. She would have to sing the missing notes back into its soul, completing the harmonic chord of its being. But to do that, she needed a moment of perfect, uninterrupted focus. A single mispronunciation, a note sung with even a trace of fear or doubt, could worsen the fracture instead of healing it. She needed the spirit still, or at least distracted from Chinese letter rage. Arinal understood the unspoken plea in her desperate glance. He saw the determination on her face, the absolute concentration required for the task. He also saw the movement in the periphery, shifting shadows at the valley's entrance, the glint of crude armor against the rock. Sauron's minions, the Orcs and lesser Wraiths, tasked with ensuring the poisoning was complete, had arrived to protect their handiwork. They would not stand by and watch her undo it. The battle was now on two fronts, one metaphysical, one brutally physical. "Buy me time," Alara whispered, her voice taut with urgency. "Just a few minutes. I can do this, but I need silence." Arinal did not hesitate. He gave her a single, sharp nod, a look of fierce resolve passing between them that said everything words could not. Then he turned his back to her and the raging spirit, planting his feet firmly on the stony shore, his sword held ready. He was one man against a tightening circle of shadows and steel, a lone guardian making a stand at the source of the world. He did not shout a challenge or a boast. He simply became a wall. As the first orc charged, he met it not as a ranger fighting for his life, but as a musician himself, his swordplay a counterpoint to the discord around him. Every parry was a beat, every step a rhythm, his sole purpose to keep the cacophony of battle away from the fragile, emerging melody of Alara's work. Behind him, Alara closed her eyes, shutting out the clang of steel, the guttural cries of orcs, the chilling whispers of the lesser wraiths that sought to seep into her mind. She reached deep into the well of her knowledge, to the oldest songs of water she had learned in Rivendell. She began to hum, a low, steady tone that vibrated through the soles of her boots and into the troubled water of the lake. The spirit recoiled at first, its form rippling in agitation, but the sound was not an attack. It was an invitation. She was not singing at it. She was singing for it, offering the lost pieces of itself, like returning a missing child to its parent. She found the first forgotten syllable, a soft, flowing sound that meant the source of all journeys. As she sang it, the spirit's chaotic swirling slowed for a fraction of a second. She pressed on, finding the next a stronger, resonant note that meant the carver of valleys. The water at her feet, which had been listless and thick, seemed to brighten, its flow becoming just a little more confident. It was working. She was reassembling the shattered mirror of its identity, piece by precious piece. Each note she sang required immense concentration, a perfect alignment of intent, breath, and memory. It was a high-wire act over an abyss of potential failure, and Arinal's desperate fight was the only thing keeping the wind from knocking her off balance. But the distraction could not last forever. A particularly large orc, seeing Arinal as the only obstacle, broke from the pack and charged with a roar. Arinal sidestepped its wild swing and drove his sword into its side, but the momentum of the creature carried them both forward. As the orc fell, it tangled its limbs with his, dragging them both down onto the sharp rocks. It was only a second of vulnerability, but it was all the other minions needed. A whip made of solidified shadow snapped out from a wraith, wrapping around Arinal's sword arm with a bite of freezing agony, yanking the weapon from his grasp. Another lashed around his ankles, pulling his feet out from under him. He fought with the strength of desperation, but they were on him in an instant, piling on, binding him with chains that felt as cold as the river's corrupted heart. The last thing he saw before a hood was thrown over his head was Alara, her back still to him, her arms raised as she sang the final, most complex syllable into the air. She was so close. The spirit was now almost fully formed, its light growing brighter, its form settling into a majestic, flowing shape. The healing was nearly complete. He felt a fierce, triumphant joy, even as rough hands dragged him away from the lake, his struggles futile against the overwhelming numbers. His capture was a disaster, but her success was everything. He had given her the time. The river would live. The sudden silence from behind her was more terrifying than the noise of battle had been. The clash of steel, the grunts of effort, they were gone, replaced by the heavy sound of dragging and the fading, mocking laughter of the retreating minions. Alara's voice faltered for a heart-stopping second, the final note of the spirit's name trembling on her lips. The spirit itself flickered, its newfound stability wavering as it sensed her sudden spike of pure, undiluted fear. Her focus, so perfectly held, was NOW Chinese letter between the culmination of her sacred task and the horrific realization that Arinal was gone. With a supreme act of will, she poured every ounce of her remaining strength into that last, trembling note. She sang it not just for the spirit, but for him, imbuing it with a desperate prayer for his safety. The note rang out, clear and perfect and true, striking the spirit like a physical thing. The transformation was instantaneous. The fractured, tormented entity dissolved into a shower of pure, glowing water that fell back into the lake with a sound like 1,000 gentle bells. The entire lake shimmered, and then, with a deep, powerful rumble that shook the valley, the water surged forward. The waterfalls ceased their syrupy drip and began to crash with their former thunderous power. The current, once confused and stagnant, found its direction with confident purpose, flowing south with a renewed, vibrant energy. The Anduin was healed. Its name was whole, but Alara felt no triumph. She stood alone on the shore, the ring cold on her finger, the victorious song of the river, now a cruel contrast to the hollow silence in her heart. She had saved the lifeblood of Middle-earth, but she had done it at a cost that felt unimaginable. The stakes of their quest were no longer about saving places or even principles. They had just become terrifyingly, devastatingly personal. The triumphant roar of the newly restored Anduin was a bitter symphony in Alara's ears. The water now surged with a clean, powerful purpose, its song one of life and journey, but the victory felt hollow, a gilded frame around a stolen masterpiece. Arinal was gone. The knowledge was a cold stone in her gut, a weight far heavier than any fatigue from the naming. The river's spirit, now whole and serene, did not speak in words, but it communicated nonetheless, its flowing form projecting images into her mind, a stark, jagged peak, piercing a perpetual storm cloud, a fortress of black rock where no birds sang, a place where the very air tasted of stolen syllables and silent screams. This was her destination, not a place on any map, but a wound in the world, a fortress specifically designed for the torture and twisting of identity itself. Getting there was not a matter of travel, but of transformation. She could not simply walk up to its gates. To be perceived by its guardians was to be immediately defined, catalogued, and unmade. Her only weapon was the very thing the fortress sought to destroy, a name, but not her own. Drawing upon the deep, painful well of knowledge she had gained from the Sorcerer's Ring and Surion's teachings, she began to weave a disguise not of cloth and shadow, but of meaning. She could not hide her essence, so she would cloak it in another. She reached into the memory of the wind, finding the name of a fleeting, insignificant gust that scurries through dead leaves in forgotten corners, a thing of no consequence, barely worth noticing. She wrapped this name around herself like a shawl, her own powerful presence shrinking, becoming muted and unimportant. To any sentry looking for a mighty lore keeper or a threat, she would register as nothing more than a wisp of dry air, a random eddy of chaos, utterly beneath notice. Passing through the fortress's main gate was like stepping through a membrane of pure despair. The air was thick and heavy, resistant to breathe, and it hummed with a low, constant frequency of anguish. It was the sound of names in pain. The walls were not made of simple stone. They were layered with captured whispers, the fractured remains of identities that had been pulled apart and examined for their power. Every step she took was a gamble. The disguised name she wore was a fragile shield, and the oppressive atmosphere of the place constantly tested its integrity. She felt a relentless psychic pressure, a silent interrogation that constantly asked, "What are you?" To slip, even for a second, to think of herself as Alara, to feel a surge of worry for Arinal, would be to send a ripple through her disguise, a flare in the gloom that would bring the entire fortress's defenses down upon her. She moved through the labyrinthine corridors, a ghost in a machine of misery. She saw the fortress's terrible work firsthand. In cells that were not rooms but pockets of distorted space, she saw captured beings, not all of them physical, being subjected to unspeakable processes. A minor forest spirit was trapped in a cage of sharp, clanging sounds that contradicted its natural harmony, its true name being slowly replaced with a discordant shriek of obedience. A stream song was played backward on a loop, turning its life-giving flow into a parody of stagnation. This was not mere imprisonment. It was a systematic dismantling of essence, a factory for producing loyal, hollowed-out puppets for the Dark Lord's armies. The horror of it was a cold fire in her veins, threatening to burn away her careful control. Each atrocity she witnessed made the name Alara scream louder in her soul, begging to be used to stop the suffering. But to do so would be to sacrifice any chance of saving Arinal. She had to remain a wisp, a nothing, and bear witness to the unimaginable. Following a particularly strong pull of dread, a resonance that felt uniquely like Arinal's steadfastness being smothered, she found her way to the heart of the complex, a vast, circular chamber devoid of any feature save for a single, black pillar in its center. And there he was. Arinal was not bound by chains of iron, but by something far worse. He was encased in a shell of shimmering, viscous silence, a substance that seemed to actively drink sound and memory. His eyes were open, but they were unseeing, focused on some internal horror. His mouth was parted in a silent scream, and she could see the faint, silver threads of his identity. His name, his courage, his loyalty, being slowly, meticulously drawn out of him like spider silk from a captive insect. He was not just a prisoner, he was a resource, his very self being mined and harvested. The sight shattered her composure. The fragile name of the insignificant gust slipped from her grasp, evaporating in the face of her raw, unshielded grief and rage. The air around her shimmered. She was no longer a wisp. She was Alara of Rivendell, revealed and exposed in the inner sanctum of her enemy. The sight that met Alara's eyes in that stark, circular chamber was a violation so profound it momentarily stole the breath from her lungs. Arinal was not simply chained, he was being consumed. The shimmering, viscous silence encasing him was a living entity, a metaphysical parasite that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic hunger. It was not drawing his blood, but his essence, faint, silvery filaments of his identity, his courage, his loyalty, the very memory of his mother's face, and the weight of his first sword were being siphoned from his spirit, drawn out into the dark pillar where they dissolved into nothingness. His eyes were open, but they were windows to an internal void, a silent scream of erasure that was more terrifying than any cry of physical pain. He was not a prisoner to be rescued. He was a resource being mined, his name unraveling thread by precious thread. This was the work of the Nameless jailer. It was not a creature of flesh and bone, but a manifestation of the fortress's core purpose, a conceptual entity woven from absence itself. It had no form to strike, no heart to pierce. It was the embodiment of the finality of silence, the absolute certainty of being forgotten. It did not attack Alara, it simply exerted its nature. A wave of profound apathy washed over her, a whispering thought that insisted fighting was pointless, that names were fleeting, that all things, in the end, returned to the same silent void. It was a logic of despair, and it sought to smother her will as effectively as it was smothering Arinal's soul. Her first instinct, born of terror and a fierce, protective love, was to lash out. She raised the ring, her mind scrambling for the most powerful name of destruction she could recall, a word to shatter the pillar and annihilate the emptiness. But as the syllables formed in her mind, Surion's lesson echoed with the force of a physical law. To fight darkness with darkness is only to create more night. A name spoken in rage, even for a righteous cause, would be a name of force, a name of dominion. It would be playing the enemy's game on their own field, and she would surely lose. The jailer fed on conflict. It would only absorb her aggressive energy and use it to tighten its grip on its victim. So she did the one thing the jailer, a creature of pure negation, could not possibly anticipate. She lowered her hand. She closed her eyes, not in surrender, but to look past the horrifying spectacle to the deeper truth beneath. She stopped seeing the jailer as a monster to be slain, and instead saw it for what it truly was, a wound. A perversion, a place where the natural order had been surgically removed and replaced with a vacuum. Its power was not its own, it was a theft, a void that could only exist where something real had been stolen away. Her weapon would not be a shout, but a reminder. Her voice, when she finally spoke, did not ring with command, but with a soft, unwavering certainty. She did not speak to the jailer. She spoke to the concept it had usurped. "I remember freedom," she whispered, and the words were not a spell, but a confession of faith. She poured into the name freedom, not an order, but a memory, the feel of the wind on the misty mountains, the unbound joy of the eagle's flight, the exhilaration of a choice made without coercion. She was not demanding that the jailer release Arinal. She was simply reaffirming the eternal, undeniable existence of freedom itself in the universe. The effect was not explosive, but corrosive to the jailer's form. The viscous silence around Arinal shimmered and wavered, as if the concept it was built upon had suddenly become less stable. The void recoiled from the palpable truth of what she described. Encouraged, she pressed on, her voice gaining strength, we now weaving a second thread into her counter song. "And I remember hope," she said, and this time her voice carried the image of the first green shoot breaking through charred earth, the stubborn flame of a single candle in a vast darkness, the unbreakable bond that had carried them this far. She defined hope not as a weak wish, but as the fundamental force of persistence that life exerts against entropy. With each spoken truth, the jailer's power weakened. It had no defense against this. It was designed to break wills and erase names, to argue that nothing mattered. It could not process a sincere, powerful argument that things did matter, that freedom and hope were not abstract ideas but foundational pillars of reality itself, as real as stone and as vital as air. The chains of silence binding Arinal began to vibrate, then to crack. They were not being broken by an outside force. They were dissolving from within, unable to maintain their integrity in the face of such potent, positive certainty. Arinal's eyes, once vacant, flickered. The silvery threads of his essence, which had been flowing out of him, paused, then began to reverse their course, seeping back into his spirit as the parasitic connection was severed. The jailer, its reason for being utterly undermined by Alara's defiant act of remembrance, simply unraveled. It didn't vanish with a bang, but with a sigh, the oppressive silence in the chamber lifting as if a great weight had been removed. The dark pillar turned to inert dust, and Arinal collapsed forward, free of his bonds, gasping great, ragged breaths of untainted air, his own name and his own story rushing back to fill the void that had been carved inside him. The battle had been won not with a sword, but with the most powerful magic of all, the refusal to forget what makes life worth living. The return to Rivendell was not a triumphant homecoming, but a solemn procession of survivors carrying the weight of a hard-won truth. The air in the valley, once a sanctuary of timeless peace, now hummed with a new and urgent purpose. Alara and Arinal stood before the Council of Elders, not as the young lore keeper and the skeptical ranger who had departed, but as weathered veterans of a war most in the room had only read about in crumbling scrolls. Alara spoke not of battles won, but of a fundamental shift in the nature of the conflict. She laid bare Sauron's true design, not mere conquest, but a systematic campaign of spiritual erasure, a quiet apocalypse of forgotten names. She spoke of the villages fading into silence, of the river that nearly forgot its own course, and of the terrifying intimacy of having her own identity mined like a common ore. The greatest weapon against this strategy, she argued, was not a hidden artifact or a lone hero, but knowledge itself, spread wide and rooted deep. This was the birth of the school of naming. It did not reside in a grand tower or a hidden cavern, but began in the sun-dappled courtyards and under the ancient, listening trees of Rivendell itself. Alara's first students were not mighty wizards, but healers, lore masters, gardeners, and scouts, those who already held a deep, intuitive connection to the world. Her curriculum was a radical departure from the secretive, hoarded traditions of old. She taught that a true name was not a word of power to be commanded, but a story to be understood. A student learning the name of a healing herb was first required to sit with it for a full cycle of the moon, to understand its journey from seed to blossom, its love for sunlight and specific soils, its role in the intricate web of the forest floor. Only then, when the knowledge was felt in the soul and not just memorized by the mind, were they taught the syllables that could accelerate its mending properties or ease a fevered brow. The lessons extended far beyond plants and stones. Alara taught them how to listen for the fading names of places, to feel the subtle dissonance in a forest where blight had begun not as a physical disease, but as a forgotten song. Rangers like Arinal learned to sense the corruption in the land before they saw it with their eyes, and were taught simple, reinforcing phrases, names of strength and resilience, to speak at the boundaries of blighted areas, creating subtle barriers that slowed the spread of the silence. It was a defense built not on walls, but on awareness, a network of sentinels attuned to the spiritual health of the land itself. The school's greatest innovation was its focus on the self. Drawing from her own harrowing experience and Arinal's victory over the Wraith's whispers, Alara instituted a practice of internal naming. Students were guided not to discover some secret, magical true name, but to consciously define the names they chose to live by. Was their name fear in the face of darkness, or was it courage? Was it doubt or trust? This was the most potent defense against Sauron's psychological assaults. A spirit that had already chosen its own definition, a fortress of self that could not be easily unmade from the inside. The school became a forge not for wizards, but for unassailable spirits, ensuring that the enemy's strategy of unnaming would henceforth meet a wall of widespread, resilient resistance, a chorus of identities that knew their own song and would not be silenced. The Peace of Rivendell was a carefully maintained melody, a harmony woven from centuries of elven song and the steadfast strength of the surrounding valley. It was a sanctuary, a place where memory was held sacred and identity was as solid as the ancient stone of its foundations. But on this day, the music faltered. It began not as a sound, but as a silence, a deep, invasive quiet that seeped into the edges of the valley, causing the waterfalls to still their joyful crashing and the leaves to forget their whispering conversations. The very light in the air seemed to dim, not from cloud cover, but from a profound dimming of essence. The enemy had not sent an army. He had come himself, in spirit and in will, to unmake the heart of elven resistance. Sauron's presence was a pressure, a vast, focused intent to scrape the name Rivendell from the world, as if it were a mistake on a parchment. In the library, a young student suddenly looked up from her scrolls, her face blank with confusion. I was reading about a valley, she murmured to her companion, her voice thin and lost. A hidden refuge, but I cannot recall its name. Did it ever exist, or was it just a lovely dream? In the gardens, a master herbalist stared at a plant he had tended for 300 years, as if he were seeing it for the first time. The name Athelas, and all its healing properties evaporating from his mind like morning mist. The valley itself began to waver, its borders becoming less distinct, its colors leaching away into a dull, uniform gray. This was Sauron's ultimate attack, not to break down the gates, but to convince everyone inside that there had never been any gates to begin with. He was not conquering Rivendell, he was canceling it. Alara felt it the moment his will touched the valley's boundary. It was a coldness in her own soul, a pulling at the threads of her own memory. She saw Arinal, his hand going to his head as a familiar path suddenly seemed foreign. She knew that to fight this force with a single name, even a name of great power, would be futile. To shout the true name of Rivendell against Sauron's immense, focused negation would be like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a single, cupped hand. His was the power of a single, monstrous eye, a voice that demanded the universe be only as large as his own ego. To oppose it directly was to accept his terms of battle, to engage in a contest of wills where his millennia of concentrated malice would inevitably crush her. So she chose a different strategy, one born from the deepest lesson of the Grey Havens. She did not stand against him. Instead, she opened herself. She became a conduit, not for her own power, but for the power of everything she had helped to remember. She closed her eyes and stilled her own fear, and then she began to listen. She listened past the crushing silence of Sauron's will, down to the deeper layers of the world, to the countless truths she had helped reaffirm. She did not speak, she invited, and they answered. The chorus began not as a sound, but as a feeling, a vibration that started in the stones beneath her feet. It was the deep, patient hum of the mountain that had shielded them from the Orcs. Its true name now sung back to it by the rangers who guarded its passes. Then came the joyful, rushing melody of the Anduin, its waters clear and strong, its song carried on the lips of the fishermen and farmers whose lives and names it sustained. The wind, once a tool of confusion for the enemy, now swept into the valley, but it carried not stolen whispers, but the true names of 1,000 forests, spoken by the men and elves and creatures who dwelt within them. From the smallest village she had healed came the quiet, steadfast rhythm of a community that knew its own name again, a simple, powerful beat of "We are here." From the high air came the fierce, beautiful cry of the eagles, a song of freedom that tore at the fabric of the oppressive silence. Alara stood at the center of this gathering storm of affirmation, her arms outstretched, not commanding, but gathering. She was the focal point for a vast, harmonic convergence of identity. She wove them together, the grand and the humble, the ancient and the newborn, into a single, overwhelming chord of being. This was not an attack, it was a reminder. It was the universe stating, calmly and unequivocally, that it was infinitely larger, more complex, and more resilient than the solitary, shrill note of a single dark will. She let this chorus flow through her and out toward the source of the silence. It did not clash against Sauron's power. It enveloped it, drowned it in a sea of undeniable truth. His voice, which sought to say "you are not," was met with a billion voices saying "we are." The sheer, multifaceted weight of this collective existence was something his philosophy could not process. His power, built on isolation and theft, had no defense against a gift freely given, against a song sung together. The oppressive pressure recoiled, not in defeat, but in a kind of horrified confusion. The will focused on Rivendell shattered, not with a bang, but with a sound like a scream being swallowed by a beautiful, all-encompassing piece of music. The shadow retreated, not to a physical place, but back into the inner darkness of its own making, unable to tolerate the brilliant, noisy reality of a world that refused to be forgotten. As the last echo of the chorus faded, the light and color and sound rushed back into Rivendell. The waterfalls crashed with renewed vigor, the leaves whispered the valley's true name, and its people blinked, their memories and identities snapping back into place with a profound sense of relief and gratitude. They saw Alara still standing in the courtyard, but she was changed. The effort had not broken her body, but it had etched itself upon her spirit. The light in her elven eyes, once bright with youthful curiosity, was now deeper, tempered by an immense and weary wisdom. She had not merely used power, she had channeled the entirety of the world's remembered self, and such an act could not be performed without cost. She had become a living archive of that struggle, a permanent bridge between the isolated self and the interconnected whole, and the weight of that role would be hers to carry from that day forward. The final, fading echo of the collective chorus, the defiant song of a world that remembered itself, left a profound silence in its wake, not the invasive silence of the enemy, but a deep, restorative quiet. In that stillness, Alara stood, forever changed. The youthful fervor that had sent her racing from Rivendell's library was gone, replaced by a wiser, wearier understanding that settled in her bones like the first frost of autumn. She had looked into the heart of oblivion and had not flinched, but the cost was etched into the new depths of her eyes. The magic of names, she now saw with crystalline clarity, was not a sword to be wielded, but a garden to be tended. It was a perpetual, delicate balance between memory and forgetting, a dance of light and shadow where the greatest power lay not in command, but in nurture. Her role was no longer that of a hero who defeats a foe and restores a permanent peace. It was that of a gardener, a keeper of the sacred seeds of identity, knowing that some would always seek to tread them into the dirt, and that her work of gentle, constant cultivation would never truly be done. Beside her, a solid and steady presence in the shifting aftermath, stood Arinal. The ranger's skepticism had long since been forged in the fires of their journey into an unshakable faith. He was no longer just her protector. He was her partner, a guardian of the truth they had fought for together. His strength was no longer just in his sword arm, but in his quiet certainty, a living testament to the power of a mortal's choice to define his own name. He did not need to speak his loyalty. It was in the way he matched his step to hers, in the watchful gaze that scanned not just for physical threats, but for the subtle graying of the world at its edges. He was the anchor to her sail, the unwavering stone in the river of her purpose, and in his constancy, she found not a limitation, but a foundation from which she could continue to grow. And though the immediate shadow had been pushed back, the knowledge of Sauron's enduring presence lingered a cold, distant star of malice on the horizon of their future. He was diminished, his strategy of quiet erasure exposed and met with a prepared resistance, but he was not gone. His was a patient evil, and his desire to own the song of creation, to reduce its magnificent symphony to a single, monotonous note under his sole control, would never truly cease. The war was not over. It had simply changed its shape. The great battles of armies might still be fought, but the more crucial conflict would continue in the quiet moments, in the speaking of a true name to a frightened child, in the reaffirmation of a village story, in the daily, conscious choice to remember who you are and what you stand for. Yet, the world they now walked through was fundamentally different from the one they had left. A resilience had been born from the brink of forgetting. The people of Middle-earth, from the simplest farmer to the highest elf lord, had been reminded of a power they had always possessed, but had perhaps taken for granted. They had felt the chilling touch of unnaming and had collectively fought it off. Now, they understood that their names were not just labels, but stories. They were weapons against despair, shields against lies, and the very threads that wove the fabric of their reality. A blacksmith now hammered his purpose into the steel with a newfound reverence. A mother sang her child's true name as a lullaby, understanding it as a spell of protection and love. The world was not just saved, it was strengthened, its tapestry mended with threads of gold, earned through courage and sacrifice, making it more beautiful and more resilient than it had ever been before. The shadow would always threaten, but it would now forever face a people who remembered the power of their own voices, and who would never again